What's up, everybody? Welcome to We Have Cool Friends, the cool show where we interview our cool friends about the cool things they're doing. I'm Greg, of course, and this is Kieron Gillen. Yay! Kieron, you've come all the way from across the pond.
I have.
How's that feel?
Cool.
Yeah.
It's been good. Honestly, I'm so rarely in the West Coast, and it's just nice to actually come here and see people and hang out.
Now, the show, We Have Cool Friends, brand new kind of. We're kind of through the new thing. But what people point out in the first episodes that I kept forgetting to do was I know the person I'm interviewing well. I know what they're up to. The viewer doesn't. Kieron, how do you describe yourself?
I am primarily a comic book writer.
Right.
Like, I basically have worked for Marvel and Image and a few other places. Over at Marvel, I did books like Star Wars and Darth Vader and the Uncanny X-Men and Iron Man and Journey to Mystery and Young Avengers. It's a lot. Basically, I've written everyone at Marvel. The exceptions I could probably list.
Yeah, that's easier.
Yeah, and at Image, I did a book called The Wicked and Divine.
I've heard of it,
which is
kind of a book people have heard of. Yeah,
a popular book that's coming to the end, pretty much now. Which is nice.
We're delaying this episode a couple weeks, so it might actually be right.
We'll be close, and the final episode is basically, this epilogue will drop. That's issue 45.
Yeah.
And it's like a 5-year mission. And my main book is a book called Die, which has come out.
That's why you're here.
Indeed, which is very delightful.
Yeah.
And forthcoming a book called Once and Future from Boom. So that's kind of what my main things are at the moment. But
Gotcha.
I have a weird and geeky history. I've done all manner of stuff.
And that's the point. Of course, you're here because I fell in love with Die. I went down to Comic Experience. You know it well. You're about to do a signing there tonight. Walked in, saw a bunch of stuff, and I said, Julie, what do I need to be reading? And Julie's like, Die #1 just came out. You need to read it. I know that you're into games or whatever. And I was like, cool, picked it up, and immediately started following you on Twitter, started tweeting at you and talking about how much I loved it. Of course, we do a comic book club, Greg's Comic Book Club, over on patreon.com/kindafunny. For $1, you can come over and do comics with us. And that's one I keep talking about on that show, right? Before we get to this, because I'm going to blow smoke all about this book for you, and I have a million questions about it and all that stuff. What I need to know is, what is going on over in England, over in Europe, over across the pond, where people like you are, I'm going to be a video game journalist, a critic. You start doing this, and then you guys decide, you know what? I'm going to leave one of the best jobs of all time and do something cooler. Because if it was just Gary Whitta writing about PC games and then going to write Book of Eli and Star Wars, I'd think, oh man, what a fluke. You did the same thing. Yeah. You used to be one of us. Why'd you leave the flock, man?
I was like, I tell you, it's weird. I'm not allowed to talk to some of my wife's friends' children because they're like, I want to be a lawyer and an accountant. And the idea that, I played video games until I got bored of that. Then I thought maybe I'll write comics instead. The idea that is a career path doesn't seem likely even to me.
Sure. There's a lot of parents who throw the brakes on when their kids start talking to me too. Wait, you just make YouTube videos? I'm like, well, yeah, he went to college. So he went to college.
Yes, exactly that. I don't know. It's like, there is a kind of the way I used to have, okay, but it's different now. But when me and Gary and someone like Charlie Brooker were coming through,
sure,
they were like the British press and the American games press were slightly different. As in, I always thought the American games press came from the tech side instead of the entertainment side.
Yeah.
And the British stuff was kind of coming from the music papers.
Okay.
So like the idea that you were writing in this funny, weird, and like often ludicrously pretentious way, you saw the music journalists do that kind of career.
Sure.
So that kind of felt natural.
Interesting.
But for me, it's always been like, I come from a fanzine background, like music press and games and stuff, that I make photocopy zines.
Yeah.
And like a lot of like falling in love with something is kind of also the process of doing it. Like, I was in terrible bands, but part of me being a terrible band was an expression of me loving music.
Yeah.
So I got into comics when I was 25, and almost instantly I was like, okay, as well as, reading comics, I'm going to obviously try to do comics. And so it kind of like just segued very naturally in my life. So I just started doing these black and white zines in the evening of like comics, whilst I was being a games journalist, and it sort of eventually segued, as in it was all kind of from the same creative place for me.
Did you feel, was there just one day, because we always talk about it with us doing Kind of Funny, when I was at IGN, the conversation with the audience was always, I'm going to be here till it isn't my #1 priority, right? And when Kind of Funny, there was that moment when it switched and we were given the, well, what are you going to do about all this? And it was, well, we want to do that instead. Did you have one of those moments? Because where were you writing? You wrote for a whole bunch of places.
Oh man,
right?
I got my first job at a magazine called Amiga Power, but then I was PC Gamer for 5 years.
Yeah.
I left, I was very freelance. I worked for like Wired and Eurogamer and PC Gamer. I co-founded the website Rock Paper Shotgun.
Yep.
That was one of my things. And I started like Phonogram, which was my first real comic, came out in 2006. And I was based, since I was freelance from 2003, it was always, okay, if it doesn't earn me money, I'll do it in the evenings.
Sure.
If it earns me money, I'll do it in the day because I need to eat. And eventually, because I was freelance, as people offered me paying jobs, I'll do that in the day. And it got to a point when I looked at my income and I realized, wait a sec, I'm actually earning more money from comics than I am from games journalism. So in my head, I just swapped mentally from being a games journalist who dabbled in comics to being a comic writer who dabbled in criticism. and then it was a slow goodbye. And I ended up but towards the end in 2010, I officially quote unquote retired on my 35th birthday because I'm a melodramatic idiot. All I wrote about towards the end was on RPS. You know, that kind of it was that slow segue. Yeah. And for me, it's just time. Like, if I was able to work for another 10 hours a day, I would not stop being a critic. Yeah. You know, and it's like, and it was rewarding and new and interesting. That's a lot of it for me. As in, I'm kind of like a neophyte. I like new things. Yeah. And like the sort of games criticism I was writing, I felt I'd done it. Like what I was interested in doing, there was like I'd never wrote a book. That's the only thing that was on my to-do list. Yeah. And there was a lot of weird nonsense I'd done. And so, okay, try something new. And it was all, and that's the passion there. And to be honest, it pays slightly better. so there was an element of, I could eat. That's exciting.
This is cool if I do this and I might make more money. Yeah.
Food.
Yeah. Do you miss it ever?
No, I miss games. I'm sorry, it's like I fell out of actually playing games. Oh. That's the sad, I'm lying. I fell out playing video games. Uh-huh. Like, I play a lot of board games. I play a lot of role-playing games. But about 5 years ago, I just kind of stopped doing it as deeply. And partly it's just time. Like, video games, especially the ones I like, are really jealous lovers. Sure. Like, I'm the big RPG guy. Yeah. I want to lose myself in a world forever. And if I
would think that's for me with Die, one of the reasons of I'm not a tabletop gamer. I'm not a D&D guy, right? We did a crossover with Critical Role. That was a lot of fun, but it didn't I wasn't like, I need to do this every week or whatever. But when I read Die, right, I see obviously all the D&D stuff, the multi-sided die. I get all that, but I also see all the stuff of playing The Witcher, right? Playing a Fallout game and having to interact with NPCs.
I mean, like the first issue of the next arc is actually explicitly a video game issue.
Oh, really?
Angela, the character in the comic, she's got she works in the industry. She's a coder.
Yep.
The whole issue, as well as being a fun, fancy adventure full of like all manner of stuff, is also about video game crunch.
That's going to go over well.
That's 100% like what Die does. It's going, let's talk about games. We'll do a really good fancy story, but also talk about the stuff that goes into games.
Sure.
So like, this is a device. I mean, it's how her relationship has entirely fell apart based upon the fact she wasn't home for 2 years.
Sure.
Wow. Yeah. And so that's kind of like the emotional grounding of it all. So I'm still a friend of a lot of people, and a lot of my close friends are games journalists. It's kind of I'm a bit like Hunter S. Thompson. If I never wrote and wasn't like really weird and vicious, I'd just retired to a barn in the middle of nowhere, and I occasionally come down, and younger people patronise me because they're clearly much better than I ever were. So it's fun. As in, I said, it's just I like game people. Yeah. And for me, definitely when I came into games, I thought video games and board games were something different. And the older I got, the more I dug into my sort of nonsense, my theory. I kind of see them all coming from the same place. This kind of like fundamental. Like the ludic base and all these different ways of gaming are tickling different urges. Yeah. And for me, it's like the fact I'm not playing video games at the moment is at least partially because video games don't fit my life at the moment.
Okay. You don't have that much free time.
Yeah, and it's free time, and maybe like I'm looking to socialize more in real life with people. Sure. You know what I mean? Those things. But in 5 years' time, if you actually look through my life, the sort of games I play change. I'm not somebody who's like played Counter-Strike for 20 years. Yeah. I'm somebody who plays stuff intensely because I'm into this now. Yeah. And so I'm definitely, I'm in this place, and God knows where I'll be in 5 years' time.
Gotcha.
But hopefully playing a different sort of game.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to talk about all of this. Of course, is We Have Cool Friends. It's our weekly show each and every Monday on youtube.com/kindafunny, roosterteeth.com, podcast services around the globe. Housekeeping. Theoretically, we should be on Spotify by the time this posts. Tim told me today he just had to check a few boxes, and this is 2 weeks from when you'll see it. So if we're not on Spotify, I'm sorry. We are failures. Kevin in particular. I blame Kevin on that one. Of course, this show couldn't be possible without our Patreon producers and our sponsors. Let's find out about them.
Shout out to our Patreon producer, David Mindtell. That's right, the Mind Freak.
See, since we're recording in advance, I don't have that copy. So I got to make it up right here. That's what I had to do. So that's why. Wouldn't it be cool if, like, when future Greg just got inserted in the show, he had, like, an eye patch and, like, a big scar? I mean, it wouldn't be cool. It would have sucked. Something bad would have happened to me. But, like, you don't know what I'm going to look like in the future, Kevin. Kevin, what if I die and you have to record the ads? Kevin's not having any fun today. You know what I mean? I don't know what his problem is over there. So, of course, Die. Comics. Everything that's happening. Wicked and Divine. I know I've tried with the comic book club, right, to bring my passion and love of comics to other people and get people in. And what the comics club is over on Patreon. Once a month, we choose a trade. Usually, everybody reads it. We all get involved, right? So I've been happy to see people go that. I don't think for the people who are just here for kind of funny content and don't know your work, they don't understand what a big deal you are. All right, you are a big deal. This is how I know you're a big deal. This is I tweeted you're coming on the show, right? A kind of funny best friend, Prince Jackson, responded, "Holy shit, shut the fuck up. Oh my god, I'm literally hyperventilating. Am I having a heart attack? Oh fuck."
That is very kind. I'm sorry, people who like my stuff really like my stuff. That's the thing. Like they're incredibly intense and inspiring.
Right.
Yeah.
What is that like?
Nice. I mean, tell you, like, it's better than the opposite.
Yeah.
I always remember, like, I wrote some nonsense. I wrote a manifesto about games journalism.
I remember. I remember seeing this pop up. Yeah.
Back in the day, and my family's really working class, so they're all mostly builders. I'm at a pub in Stafford, and my dad's at the bar, and like one of my brothers comes up and says, "Being on the internet, a lot of people angry with your son." The internet just reached Stafford, and it's you imagine this real ale drinking place.
Yeah, just sitting there with a Guinness.
Yeah, anyway, but it's better than to be, it's definitely better to not be hated. It's good. I mean, like, especially because a lot of the work I do is about how stuff I've loved has transformed me.
Yeah.
And like, me and Jamie as well, who was the artist on Wickdiv, since we're people who've been transformed by art, we're really aware, but when people completely come to us and like, with that kind of look of like, power in their eyes, we're aware of the responsibility of that and the magic of that. So in other words, some people like, they say, is that weird? And it's not, it is both simultaneously a bit weird, but it's also the point. Yeah. Like, I don't let it go to my head because it's not about me, it's about the work. In other words, they found something that reflects themselves back and they see themselves more clearly.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of like, I'm aware of like, that's how art works. So like, if people weren't responding to that, I would have failed. Sure. That's always the thing. I mean, we had a Wickdiv party in, Wickdiv is a short for Wick and Divine. Yeah. In Emerald City.
Really?
And it was, I mean, we kind of throw parties and DJ and this one especially was like a crossover from like people turned about 8 o'clock, they were dancing about 8:15, loads of people in cosplay, and really like this very like queer progressive audience, and then clearly all really enjoying themselves, and it completely went off. Like people, multiple people, as far as I can work out, were trying to have sex in the cubicles.
Nice.
And they had to be broken up.
Yeah.
Like
kind of party.
That doesn't often happen at comic parties, does it? You know what I mean? And that's the kind of like, when people come to Wickdiv, that's what they get. And like with Die, like people, I've written this kind of RPG along the side, which the beta is out, and people are playing the beta and making it their own. Yeah. And that's what I'm into. I'm into like trying to, the hard hit. I'm not into the soft hit, as in someone quite liking it. It's just something you can binge watch happily. Right. I'm always into doing stuff that makes people want to have tattoos. I go full on.
So, talk to me when you're getting ready to, or not even getting ready to leave games journalism. When you're a games journalist, you're a critic, you're doing all these different things. You start writing comics on the side. Is the goal always to get to something like Die or Wicked? Is it just like, I'm trying this out? It's a new thing that I've been interested in. I'm going out and being a storyteller.
I was one of my standards. I have all the careerist instincts of a kamikaze pilot. I'm not very good at thinking things through. It was so much like, I'm just going to try this out. Yeah. So, Marvel came to me. It's not like I went, it's always the sort of thing, as in, I never deliberately set out to have a career. So I've actually more like, it sort of came from the work. My thing is always the work is the calling card. At the same time, the sort of writer I wanted to be is the sort of writer who predominantly does create their own work. Like, there's some people who, like, their aim is to write for Marvel, and more power to them. Yeah. But for me, it's like, I've written Star Wars and I've really enjoyed Star Wars. But like, imagine if like George Lucas did a Buck Rogers film rather than Star Wars. We want to have Star Wars. So if you're in a position to make new stuff, and you're able to support it and sell well enough, trying to put new fantasies into the world is like, for me, the main goal of a creator, as in what could only you do. Yeah. And like when you get to the creator's own stuff I'm most proud of, that's the aim. It's always, how can we make a new mythology for the 21st century? Yeah. It sounds very pretentious, but I just mean like something that's meaningful and like something that's addictive and stuff that people really get into. So that's kind of the goal. Yeah. You don't get into the industry to be shit. You know what I mean? Imagine if that was your goal. I just want to be kind of mediocre.
I just want to be mediocre. Just get a paycheck, check in, check out. Yeah.
I would deal drugs if I did that. It's easier. I wouldn't. I really wouldn't. Mum, I really wouldn't. But that kind of. That's the thing.
Want to have an impact.
The books I love. I'm a big Alan Moore fan and Grant Morrison and all those kind of like those writers. Yeah. Like, you want to be as good as that, and you try as hard as you can to pull it off. I
think you have. No. That's the thing is, I think you have. You have a very interesting distinction for me personally, and now Kind of Funny Best Friends. You are the first interview subject I've interviewed since Chris Jericho, a WWE wrestler, that I was nervous before I interviewed.
Really? Oh, wow.
Right, yeah. And I was trying to put my finger on it because people ask me all the time, right? Like, oh, do you get nervous? Like, because I've done like, the Avengers stuff or whatever, like movie people and whatever. And it's like, no, I get it. And I think part of it usually is, especially with Kind of Funny, is if you're going to come be in on the shows, you obviously get it. We're a weird YouTube podcast and you get it, right? And I understand that you said yes, so you get it. But it is that thing that I think Die is such a special book. And Die hit me so hard reading and got me. I mean, issue 1 literally was like, I bought it for other people. I bought it for Jared. I bought it for Gary. This trade is, I bought to give to Tim afterwards, right? Like, it hooked me that much and totally unexpected. Because with all due respect, of course, we did Wicked and Divine Volume 1 on the Comic Book Club when it was still the morning show. And I was like, nah, not really for me. Didn't work for me. And I moved on. And so to get caught off guard with this book and then to read into your letters page, which are really just your essays, right? Like you just sit
letter
there.
From me.
Exactly. It's a letter from you to the readers and see how you feel and how you created this blows my mind. Because you hit an interesting point that is all tied into all this, that the comic content on Kind of Funny really starts from a New Year's resolution 2 years ago where I was like, I've decided I want to finally write my Superman comic. And I've been interested in comics forever, and I started doing the thing, and it was one of those things of when we set off to do it, and I was giving updates on the Comic Book Club monthly, it was, man, I'm falling behind, I'm not hitting the deadlines, and it's because it's not my passion. My passion is playing video games and talking about video games and then reading comics and talking about comics, but creating them, I wasn't finding it. And some people were like, well, maybe you should try doing your own thing. I was talking to other comic creators and they're like, have you thought about this? And I was like, okay. And I started trying to I wrote outlines for different books that were like original creations and then got so overwhelmed by working backwards from it. Of this is the main character and this is their relationship with their parents, but their parent, and like, I was so lost in the minutia. To see what you've done with Wicked, to see now as Die continues to unfold, the amount of stuff that's gone in, to read the essays with Die, where you talk about what San Diego Comic-Con was it where you thought it up?
2016 it would have been, wouldn't it?
And like you talk about like you couldn't let go of the idea, then bursting into tears at a restaurant because it finally clicked for you, and then rather than sit down to write the book, you started writing all what the game is and what the world is. And like, how do you not lose your mind? How do you not get lost in the ocean of ideas and what you need to do and how you have to get from point A to point Z in all 24 places between?
So I do like the just Die fell over as if into,
the exhaustion of what this book actually takes.
Yeah, I know that feeling. Little Die book. You don't. And that's the thing is, like Wick Div is like clearly. Do you have Marmite in America? I don't know.
Who?
Marmite.
No, but I've had it sent to us many a time. Yeah.
In which, but the kind of it's an acquired taste. You either go for it or you don't. The people are going hard off and do.
It's a paste you put on toast, right?
And it's easy to bounce off, and it's not, if it's not for you.
Yeah.
And this one almost stuff's a bit like that, because it's. But I would be better if I was I would be a different sort of writer, but arguably a more classically better writer if I was more elegant. And I was thinking when I originally wrote Die.
This book wants to die, Kevin. Okay. I'm getting it, Kevin.
It's a suicidal book. That's terrible.
You keep talking.
I do like the idea of actually the book having maybe the next trade will have a lower center of gravity, so we can pull that off.
Hey, that's the other thing about it too. As a man who reads a lot of trades, this is a thick trade. You put a lot of love into this.
It's like for $10 as well. That's the kind. Okay, we sound like an advertisement now.
Hey, everybody! If you didn't know, this episode of We the Cool Friends is brought to you by Die. Image Comics says.
It was kind of like the first one. We'll make it cheap and we'll make it like a really thick book, and because fantasy novels, I was thinking fantasy novels are quite thick.
Yeah.
So you want it to kind of feel like that. The question, not getting lost. And my initial fan with Die was, okay, maybe for once you're going to be elegant. So instead of like throwing everything you ever loved into it, like Wick Div or Uber or like all these other books, maybe I'll be an elegant story about 6 adults and comparing their adulthood to their childhood and their fantasies versus their adult realities. Maybe I could write that elegantly and beautifully. And then like 2 weeks later, I've thrown the entire history of the RPG in, and it's this blur, this enormous mess.
Yeah.
And that's just me. I'm like, when I'm really care about something, I've got like one gear which is too much. You've got to be everything, and for me, it's like, especially with Die, I'm deliberately generating more content than anyone will ever need.
Right.
Like I know the length of Die. It's not like Wick Div, which has no room for a sequel. It's got Die's got room for a sequel, but I'm very aware in the first series of that, I won't cover nearly all the world. Like the world is.
Well, hold on. This is the thing too. I can already see the comments starting to pop up. They love you. You're great. We haven't said what Die is. What is the pitch for Die?
Okay, let me go into pitch mode. Look away.
Look away.
Back. Come back. Okay. In 1991, 6 teenagers sat down to play a role-playing game. They disappeared. No one could find them for 2 years. 2 years later, 5 of those 6 children are found wandering a forest somewhere in England. They were unable to say where they'd been or where the missing child was. It was considered lucky they managed to escape. The year is now 2018. They're about to discover, these teenagers now are like 40-something, slightly broken adults, about to discover no one ever really escapes. Die is a logical collision between the 1980s D&D cartoon and Stephen King's It. That's what I pitched to Eric when he said yes. So basically it's a group of like kids who, spoilers, disappeared into a fantasy world as teenagers, then escaped, leaving one person behind, and then 20, 23, 24 years later, they get dragged back into the world as adults. So in other words, this is about, as I just said, comparing this sort of the adult stuff to the kid stuff.
Yeah.
And the world is a reflection of all that. I mean, old crushes or ways their lives have gone right or wrong. And like, you compare how they're in the real world to the fantasy world. And the sort of theme of the whole thing is comparing fantasy and reality. And in a very real way, asking what is fantasy for? So that's like, as a species, we're kind of addicted to it. Yeah. And our ability to draw a line is like, is potentially really poisonous to ourselves. So that's kind of like the thinking. But it's also, so it's got that emotional side. It's about these kind of these portraits of real people, because that's kind of the joy of it. And it's not like they go into this world and they have like immediately start enjoying themselves with fancy adventures. This is kind of like one of the characters' immediate response to being trapped on Die is, well, I've got to pick the kids up. I'm in the middle of a divorce. If I don't pick the kids up, I'm going to lose the kids. And that it's always about like, yes, we do. Stephanie Hans does the most grandiose fantasy world you can ever imagine. Sorry.
No, don't worry about it. Kevin's all hands on deck. He knows what he's up to.
Stephanie Hans does the most grandiose fantasy world you can imagine. But at the same time, it's always emotionally grounded. It's about, here's a real person, and we draw between, here's something in the real world, here's something in the fantasy world, and use it to kind of externalize their kind of like feelings. So that's what drives it. The world it's set on is like this 20-sided dice, like an enormous.
Brilliant.
Which is like
when that reveal happens, I'm like, that's awesome.
It's a giggle. But like what we've done is like every of the realms of the sides and the dice is kind of based or inspired by one of the things that went into D&D, as in one of the historical elements, like. And not just like, there's a Tolkien region, but it's not a Tolkien region as in it's Middle Earth.
Yeah.
It's a Tolkien region where it's basically talking about what inspired Tolkien. Like this episode 3 is basically, I had the idea of just dropping like Hobbiton into the Somme. Because you think about it, Hobbiton is holes in the walls, that, and just digging into Tolkien's how World War I shaped him.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what we do. So all the regions aren't just, this is the region where it's H.G. Wells. It's about, okay, what was H.G. Wells about? And so we've got this enormous structure where, we've got 20 regions, it's all mapped out. I know where they all are. I know the politics of the place. But like our story is only going to go where we need it to.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, it's big. I've deliberately made it to be much, because human fantasy is kind of infinite, and I kind of wanted to make this love song to like what fantasy can be. And so by definition, all human fantasy has to be inside Die. But at the same time, it's also got to feel like its own thing.
Sure.
So that's, as I said,
well, that's
too much.
the thing is you give touchstones to it, right? And that's what I think I fail all the time when I start pitching the book, right? Because I'm sure you've heard it a million times. I go the way of it's D&D Jumanji, right?
I say like my 2-word pitch is Goth Jumanji.
Okay, great.
That's like, as I know, as you get the tone. So you get I know what happens. They go into another world, and I get the tone. I mean, Goth's a bit too jokey because Die's a bleak,
very, very bleak world, right? And I like how in one of the essays you're like, it's called Die. It's going to be a bleak thing. And it means obviously the dice and, of course, dying in general. But what I fail and what I can't eloquently ever do when I pitch it is get into everything you do to make it not what you expect. Where I think it would be so easy to be like, and this is your cleric, and this is your thing. Like, you made your own classes, and not only that, you don't say this, but they're all cursed classes, right? It reminds me of, there was a great Superman annual a long time ago, where it was Superman was already dead, it was a far-flung future, and normal humans, each one of them got one of his powers to be like the Superman squad. And on TV, that was great, but as soon as the thing was over, the X-ray guy was like, give me the glasses, so he could put on lead glasses so he could stop seeing through everything. Like, all your characters and heroes, right, are classes you understand, but also so flawed that like, oh my God, like, right, like you're Neo, right? Like, your cyberpunk is an addict, and that screws things up as it goes on.
I mean, I've written a lot of it in the back, so you've read it, but so much of the class, okay, let's look at the classic D&D classes and deconstruct them a little.
Yeah.
But not just make it a critique, make it a cool thing in of itself. And because of the way I'm wired, they're kind of bleak cool things.
Yeah.
So like, so the Neo, because, it was always bugging me, like, why there was this weird prejudice about thieves in D&D. It's like, because all the players do is steal gold. Everyone's a thief.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's find a way of mechanizing. Like, they have the Neos have these cybernetics. You have fair gold. that disappears every morning. They need to use gold every day.
Yeah.
And that's kind of, oh no, they're always going to be tracing gold. And when I was actually doing that was a really good narrative thing. But when I did the playtest of the game for the first time, when I used the Neo, the player basically grabbed at the coin the second you put it on the table, because that's really Moorish in that kind of like the physicality. And all the classes, like all the thinking. Okay, how does that really work? Because like my thinking, like the Godbinder is my take on the cleric. Yeah. And one of the things about D&D is like it's really weird. You know, the idea that my miracles will cure you, but only slightly. So I've got, and what kind of god says, okay, I'll like maybe close the wound a quarter, maybe you try again later, you can close it by, and that just makes no sense. So I kind of just like, it's more like being a call center god. You know, the idea that you hey God, I've got a problem here. So sort of playing with that idea a bit, and so no, let's make a more transactional. Let's make the idea is something a bit closer to a demonologist. Yeah. Because the idea of a demonologist is somebody who barters with an extra planar entity to get stuff done. And of course, what's the difference between a demon and a god? And that's like a freedom fighter terrorist question. Yeah. That's the kind of sort of thinking I did. And getting a godbinder who, especially in the character we use in the comic, who's an atheist as well. That's fun. There's a kind
of her conversations with the gods are some of my favorite.
Oh, right? Fun. Izzy's kind of like how sharp she is. You know what I mean? Like she really kind of like goes for it. So yeah, like all the classes have that kind of like dynamic to them. Yeah. Which hopefully, that's thing is, I'm aware that a lot, especially Die, is really deconstructionary and could be just read as critique. And for me, it's very important to also make it its own core myth. Like, if you ever read Planetary.
Yeah.
Oh, I love Planetary. Yeah. But like, Planetary was something a book I loved, but B, a book I was thinking about as in when trying to plan Die. And what Planetary does is, like, it has this backbone, and the backbone is a conspiracy story, as in what's really going on in the world. But the actual individual episodes are a deconstruction of a genre that goes into superheroes. Like issue 2 is like the giant Godzilla story. Like issue 3 is the Hong Kong action movie story. Yeah. And all these ingredients, and each story both simultaneously says something about it, whilst also acting like a really good version of it. So it simultaneously deconstructs and shows you how you can look at it new. I mean, I think there's Alan Moore intro which describes it, because it's a book about archaeologists, that's the device. So it's like taking something from the dirt and cleaning it up. And that, when I reread that, I thought, oh no, this is what I'm trying to do. You know what I mean? I want to try to find a way to make people think about clerics or demonologists. And to be honest, so much about being a comic book writer, even work for hire, is that. As in, okay, we've got this character everyone loves. How can I put enough of a spin to make it interesting?
Yeah. Not just tell the same Iron Man story again and again, right? Yeah. And that's like the funny thing about it, again, being a games person, right? Of something, playing a game I don't ever think about, but like you do so well in one of the panels where like Neo needs the gold. Chuck runs over and starts digging into a carcass's chest, and I'm like, what is he? He pulls out the gold, right? He's looting the body. Like, and like, yes, that's what it would look like in a video game, rather than Diablo. They go down and
I always imagine it's like any left-right scrolling beat 'em up at like Final Fight or whatever. Like they're just going to bins and eating chicken. Yeah, like weird, chicken eating men going to the bins. It's just a wonderful image.
And then it's the fact of, for this first arc, right? The introduction of this conversation that seems so innocuous in the beginning and then has ramifications in the final pages, right? Of like, we're still not sure if the fantasy world is the real world or if it's just fantasy. So we're going to treat it like the real world, which means we're inside this game. We already know we're in already as these characters, but we're really going to role play, right? And so it's like, I think, Ash has this conversation in the trenches with the hobbits, right? Basically of like taking down this guy's letter to his wife, and she can't tell if it's real or fake. And she doesn't know what to do with that information, right? And like, it's so brilliant in these different twists. Not to mention the fact that, as right there with Ash, I'm calling Ash a she in this scenario, because in the game, Ash the man goes into the game and plays Ash the dictator as a female character, right? There's so many mind fucks in this thing that I can only imagine. Like, you talk about all the characters as adults being broken, like what the ramifications of this would be. Ash's sister losing her arm, leaving the game, now being a coder, having one arm. Like, you do such a great job of setting up these really interesting moral conundrums for all of them and putting them back into it.
Thank you. I mean, I'll tell you what, like, there's so many really good D&D comics, like, written by friends, and I genuinely love them.
Sure.
But I was sort of aware when going to Die, like, no one had really took it seriously.
Yeah.
That was kind of what Die does, and Die takes it incredibly seriously. I mean, like, I think that's what really appeals to people, as in, he's going in hard. He's clearly somebody who knows a lot about he's researched it and he's thinking about it in a serious way. And not all RPG comics should be like this, but I think maybe one should be.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, if you don't mind, can you talk about, and I know the story from reading it, but how you came up with the idea for this, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was like me and Jamie McKelvey and an amazing writer called Ray Fawkes. We were just like bumming around San Diego. We're getting an ice cream at the mall.
Yeah.
And we started just joking about the 1980s kids, the D&D cartoon, which if you hadn't, obviously, it's basically about a group of kids who go onto a theme park ride, a D&D themed theme park ride, and get trapped in a fantasy world. And they did 3 seasons, and they never filmed the final episode. So they were still, and their thing was, can we get home? And so like, we started joking, it's like, whatever happened to those kids?
Yeah.
And that's like, and it nagged at me. It sort of nagged me. I was like, that's interesting. And by the evening, I had that burst into tears moment, and I realised, I know what the story's about. As in, this is why it's upsetting, because I'm thinking about maybe part of me got dragged into a fantasy world at the age of 16 and has never come out.
Sure.
And how has my love of fantasy and games and all this actually hurt myself and my emotional development? How has it stunted me? Which is like, obviously that's a bleak question.
Yeah, and what do you mean by that? Reading that, you talk about that in your essays.
I think some of those questions like one of my things is like gaming. But I'm old enough that I lived through Satanic Panic stuff, and like many times we had to really try to justify games. But we've won. I was at San Diego last week, and so
the popular arts.
Exactly. Like we won. So it's that kind of, when you hit like that kind of age, you can be a little bit more introspective, because they're not going to take the games away.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, let's stop. Maybe I neglected my friends and lovers. Maybe like I've I mean, people often talk about this writers, but like children of writers are the kind of, they were jealous of the people in my dad's head or my mum's head, and that all those kind of areas. And how many games journalists I know have like a form of RSI.
Yeah.
No one ever talks about that. And there's just some examples, and it's like, and I still love games.
Sure.
But I kind of like the idea that it's a book about being grown up, quote unquote. It means we can have those conversations, because it's we can be a bit chill. Yeah, this is bad. This is good. We can talk it through.
And that's what's been interesting about it, right? And again, we're 5 issues in. Issue 6 comes in August.
Yeah.
Trade's available now. Go get it. Is some of the characters, like you said, right? They go in, right? And Angela has the conversation of the kids. I got to get home to the kids, right? I find it fascinating that Ash doesn't mention his wife, right? Like, that's not on the tip of his tongue. And granted, he understands, like, I know how to get out of this. We got to do this thing. We're going to go home. He's clearly motivated by that. But watching each one of them wrestle, which again, by the final page of the books comes up with this, like, with what they're leaving behind and what that means. Like, I think it drives your point, right? Of like what you're leaving in these games and what you're checking out on.
It's definitely like that. And like, there's a one bit you hint. There's a bit in issue 3 when the Hobbit, they're talking about the wife and the kids, and not had the fact Ash never had kids.
Yeah.
And they're talking with the Hobbit who did have kids. There's a sentence, not Hobbit,
I know you.
Little Englander.
Don't bother suing. You'll never be able to.
In a very real and legally binding way, they are not hobbits.
Looks like a lot like Elijah Wood, but no, that's just me. Oh my, sorry, my eyes are playing tricks.
Anyway, there's like this creature, and they're talking about rings and having wedding rings.
Yeah.
And there's a bit where the Hobbit, said, the Little Englander goes.
I know what it means, right?
Yeah.
I knew what it meant, but I didn't understand what it meant. Now it's always there, a constant reminder.
Yeah, like a ring is always a reminder you're with your partner, and it's like, you're not wearing a ring.
Yeah.
And that's really loaded.
Yeah.
In that kind of, and like, especially Ash is somebody who is, her sexuality is very linked to how she was in Die.
Yeah.
And that's really kind of like key to her. So that's I've sort of set up that kind of like, Ash's relationship with Di is strained in an interesting way. And of course, she's the narrator. And it's that kind of like, she says, I'm going to try to tell the truth to you.
Yeah.
And it's that, of course, if someone says, I'm going to try to tell the truth to you, that's immediately implies that she could lie.
Sure.
So in other words, she's absolutely her character class is a dictator, which is kind of like bards. If everyone was really fucking petrified of bards, is the idea.
Because a dictator will talk to you and make you do whatever they want.
I mean, that was my kind of deconstruction of like, if someone casts, a bard does an inspiring song, like, that's just like a +1 to hit in a D&D game.
Yeah.
But you think, what does that really mean? That means you've just like got emotional. What is it? You just want to be emotionally up?
Yeah.
Is it equivalent of like hitting them with drugs?
Yeah.
And like if somebody, uses charm, charm is a creepy. If you think about charm for a second, that's creepy. So that was what I was trying to do with the dictator. The idea that they perform an art form. In the case of the dictator, it's kind of like poetry, but like it could be any art form, and that emotionally messes with you. There's a line in the RPG in the character class. They can play a human like human emotions like they would a harp. They can pluck the strings. They can snap them, and that's the dictator. And everybody knows the dictator can emotionally mess you up.
Yeah,
and that means they're a horror. I mean, it's a horror book in many ways.
Yeah,
but that's that. Anyway, but Ash, she's a dictator, but she's also literally the dictator of the story. She's dictating it to us.
Yeah.
So like that's all kind of mixed in together. But yeah, that's kind of mean, there's 6 core cast members in Die, and Wicked has a cast of like 13. And my kind of thing with Die is, even though it's going to be a shorter sort of series, I wanted more complicated people. Like, they are like really intense and they've got strengths. I mean, like Ash's slight control freakery, you know, Ash and her plans, how she organises her friendship with different people, how she's kind of, her fear is really interesting. Her fear, she doesn't want to be here. Because she thinks that the longer she stays here, the worse she's going to get. Because the dictator's power is corrupting. Sure. You know, it feels like this is too much, you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
And all the
she has that great conversation with the, I guess, mayor of Glasstown, right?
Where Chancellor, I think I said.
Yeah, sorry.
Like no, it's like...
Fucking nerd. Give me the glossary, Kevin. Jeez.
I think you'll find it's Chancellor.
Well, actually. But, like, you know, where it's like, this is the moment, they'll never trust me again. And by the way, we're not, like, going full spoilers, but you should read the book and all this stuff. Like, come on, guys.
It is one of those things where basically mind control characters uses mind control at some point.
Yeah, I was surprised. Shocked.
I don't think that's a spoiler, you know. But that's how people, definitely a big part of Die is how people feel about Die, and all the different characters have different takes. So you got a character like Chuck, and Chuck is deliberately this aggressively shallow character.
And I appreciate that. Like, I think his introduction panel, you're like, not American, even though he tried, you know, no matter how he acts or something.
It was a completely a British thing, like the kid who wants to be American. Yeah. You know, that was 100% a British thing, and it still is now, to be honest.
Oh, sure.
And leaning into that was fun.
Yeah.
But you know, and Chuck, you know, and he's become like a famous writer, and like a hack writer, but a famous writer.
Yeah.
But
Gary Whitta, based on Gary Whitta.
I would never say such a thing to
I
that
will,
guy.
but I'll totally say.
Okay. But you know, and if he has a much more light, because he doesn't. He says, "I'll treat it as seriously as you people do," but he clearly doesn't believe it. And that kind of like, and he's got like the second arc's mainly focus issues. Like each issue tells a story, like continues, but it's really focused around one character. And like the Chuck issue absolutely digs into him in terms of like, what is that doubt about?
Right.
And what is that that slight alienation and coldness about them, you know, what is beneath that weird smile of his?
Right.
So it's fun, you know, that kind of way.
Well, sure. I mean, that's why he's one of the most interesting, watching them all on the field and trying to figure it out, like, you do such a great job of the introduction of when he gives his character sheet and he says, "I'm the fool," right? And Soul's like, "Of course you are." And then throughout the book of being, you know, again, he's not treating it seriously. He's Leroy Jenkins,
yes,
and he's just running in.
His power is literally Leroy Jenkins' superpower.
Exactly.
As long as he, like, the fool's ability is basically, as long as he acts in a completely carefree way, he'll probably be fine.
Yeah.
Everyone around him.
Exactly, right?
You know.
And that's the thing of watching him work and watching it work out for him. It is fascinating and how it's all going to play out with them, each other that way. So here's my question. When you were talking about Ash, you were calling her a her as well.
My general way of doing it is Ash Dominic Ash is the character's name. In Dominic, I use the he pronoun. In the game, I use the she pronoun.
Okay.
An exploration of like what Ash's relationship with gender is part of the book.
Yeah.
Like, you know, there's explicitly a bit where Ash talks about it. And Ash, you know, talks about like both her sexuality and gender. But
that hasn't happened yet, right?
No, issue 4. There's a bit like where Izzy tries to corner her. You know, and like that bit. Yeah. And Ash, this is all. Ash does the speech, as in caption. She doesn't tell her friends.
Yeah.
And that's so Ash is like a closed off person.
Yeah.
And that's the best I can give you for now.
Sure. Okay. That's my thing. I was wondering.
Ash said this is the best I can give you for now, and that's one of those questions. You know, you will read into those words. You know, there's multiple ways you could read Ash, to be honest.
Yeah.
And I'm fine with that because that's kind of the complexity of how people use fantasy to explore bits of their identity.
Sure.
You know, like sometimes people just like playing a cross-gender character for many reasons, and I also have like trans friends who playing a character is a major part of their coming out story.
Yeah.
And that was it's a place something to explore. By definition, fantasy happens before action. Like you think about, you know, no matter what it is, you think about something before doing it. So like there's that side. Yeah. So Ash is exploring all those kind of areas.
See, that's one of the narrative threads I'm the most interested in as we continue to go.
I mean, I love all the characters, but like Ash is that's you know, powerful, like interesting stuff to write about. I think.
Do you plan on talking about that in terms of like how Ash defines?
I really hope. Okay, I hope by the end Ash sorts their shit out. You know what I mean? Like, because all the characters are hot mess. Not quite. Most of the characters are kind of hot messy in a variety of ways.
Sure.
And you like, I mean, a lot of my characters like Wicked and Once a Future as well. All these kind of characters are quite often messes at the start, and I'm really into stories of how people put themselves together again or not.
Sure.
Is that kind of like I described Wicked was all these characters have hamartia, to go like Greek classics. They've got this fatal flaw that will destroy them, and Wicked's story is, will this character overcome this fatal flaw or be consumed by it? And there's a little bit of that in Die. It's a bit more complicated because their fatal flaws are manifold.
Yeah.
But like that kind of wrestling, who do you want to be? And that who you want to be, that's a question of like, how do you see yourself? I mean, like all these kind of things are and can you be that person you want to be? And especially built into Dyers, can you, what would you give up to be that person?
Yeah.
And these are really loaded questions. And what I find exciting about Dying, this is why it actually works quite well as an RPG, is it's the answer. This is like you put different people in and you can chew them over and like, and one day you might go one way, another day the other. It's all interesting. I find it fascinating to write because you get these people together. It's less planned than Wictive. As in Dyer's explicit, I know all the material, like there's a lot of the world, but like putting the characters together and seeing them argue and what they choose to reveal and what they choose to conceal, that's really interesting.
Does that surprise you too when you're writing?
Yeah. I mean, that's like all the way as a writer. It's like I'm a planner. Not full Hickman, but I'm a pretty intense planner.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm always creating scenarios to write, and it's like X character talks Y character into something, and I don't know how they're going to do that, and but I know there will be a way.
Yeah.
And there's always a joy. It's like there's a bit in Wictive. There's these characters like they're trying to talk this character Dionysius, who's a sweetheart, into joining the attack against the baddie, and like all the characters given like a serious pitch. And my note was Dionysius joins them for the attack.
Yeah.
And everyone does a serious pitch of why they should do it for their friends. Then the young character was she's saying something serious as well. And she said, "They've got my mum and dad," and then Dionysius, "Don't worry, I'll come with you." And then he says, "By the way, I'm Dionysius. We haven't met, have we?" And that's the kind of like, and that both that as in, of course, he'll just do it because he's a good person. But that he doesn't need he needs the emotional reason, not the actual intellectual reason. Yeah. But also the fact that the moment of kindness afterwards, as in this is what I should, as in recognizing what the moment is and trying to treat them like people. That's that. That was 100% that character. You put like, I don't know, another character, like you put any of the characters and die into it, they would all act in different ways.
Yeah.
And that's the fun of writing for me. And like all the characters have their different perspective. But I don't know, it's like you'll get this question like, who's your favourite character in your book? And it doesn't really work like that.
Yeah.
For me, it's always like, I like writing X character with Y character. Like, you put Ash and Izzy in the same room, it works really well.
Yeah.
You put Chuck and Izzy in the same room. In fact, put Chuck with anyone, it works well. Chuck is really annoying. And annoyance is normally quite good to write, as in, because annoyance gets beneath the skin.
You do the great thing, obviously, to keep me wanting to every month the issues, right? But where you drop in just the tidbit, and I'm like, oh, I hope they come back to that, right? So obviously the Ash stuff we're talking about. But for Chuck, right, like with Neo, and she's like, "You were a terrible first boyfriend." He's like, "I know I was." And it's like, oh my God, like I want the flashback to that. And that's the other thing I really want is the flashbacks more to the original world, right? What it was for them in 91 and when they were running around that.
This is like Die is so good because it's one good thing about writing Die is the flexibility. That flexibility, as in, I've got these two time periods, like when there were kids 16 in the world and not, and the present day in the fantasy world and not, but also every point in between. Like how were they messed up as 30-year-olds or like 28-year-olds?
Yeah.
And the case, and that's. When I mention something like that, oh, you were a shitty first boyfriend, or like her dog died.
Yeah.
If I mention something, I'm probably going to come back to it.
Yeah.
I'm definitely that kind of structural writer.
Dude, when Izzy gets the book and like, "Well, read from the sacred text," and she starts, she's like, "This is my diary," and they're all like, it's like, oh my God, like she's founded a religion. The atheist has started a religion. Oh my God,
that's fun, and like especially the horror of it.
Yeah.
Like the shame. I mean that weird mixture of shame and pride. I mean, think about it, Izzy's got a lot of stuff inside her, but she was a really bad teenage bully. That was the thing, and she realizes that was awful.
Yeah,
and I thought that's really interesting. The idea of somebody who was like really like not physical bully, but like emotionally cruel, and then like stepping back and go, "Well, I shouldn't have been like that."
Sure.
And then what do you do? Like Izzy is a little bit overcompensating. I think that's a fatal flaw. But like that's really interesting to write as well because you were that person. You did those things.
Sure. Yeah. And you've changed, sure, right?
Yeah,
everybody has, but to have to wrestle with and have it like right in your face, right? Not even a mirror image of it, the actual act, and see how it is. Yeah, like the other one for me that I wanted to make sure I complimented you on was early on. I think it's
you were incredibly kind here, Grant.
Dude, I love the book. I mean, but when Sir Lane shows up, right, and we get that beautiful flat. Well, first off, he shows up and Ash is like, I think his name was Sir Lane. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's been so long, I've never thought of you. And like, they had this whole thing where she gave him like you won't rest until you see me again at his request.
Yeah.
And then you show up 30 years later, right? And yeah, he's this corpse and his eyes are gone. It's Jesus, it's holy.
It goes back. It's that kind of like they age badly. It's that kind of like reunion.
Yeah, right. But you do. I thought it was such a great job early on in the book to set the stakes of what's happened here, right? And I also love when they're all trying to all right, we have to get from point A to point C, we can go one of two ways, and they know everyone they know from the old years are going to be over there, and they're like, let's go that way. It'll be harder this way, but we don't want to see anybody.
Yeah,
and I can't wait for them to see everybody.
It's one of those great stories. If someone say, "Oh, we're not going to do that," eventually.
Yeah, eventually they have to.
You know, it's like Lord of the Rings with Moria. It's like kind of like we mustn't go through Moria. We must. Okay, we'll try. Oh, we're going to have to go. Of course, you were going to go through Moria.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's the joy of the fantasy, as in like you say something like that, and the expectation builds, and what's in Angria.
And again, for you playing with expectation, right? In Glasstown. When they're like, all right, cool, we can totally get you where you need to go, but first you have to go here and here, and everybody's like, oh, it's a fetch quest. Like, screw it, we won't play the game that way. That's
my favorite. Like the first arc. This is definitely inching close to the spoilers. But
again, I've told you to read it. It's a great comic. This doesn't stop anything.
Pause this podcast right now. Yeah. Get V to a comic shop. But that was so important to me. As in, it's a deconstruction of the fantasy genre in lots of ways. But like flirting with the idea of being, oh no, this is just a straight quest. We're going across the world. We're going to get the baddie. We're going to get to Mount Doom and destroy the ring, metaphorically. And it's like, no. Yeah. why the hell will we do that? Let's do something like, and of course that's such a thing like a role-playing party would do anyway, in terms of like, no, GM, your game's shit. we're going to do something else. Like the episode's called Premise Rejection, which is like a phrase by Robin Laws, who's like an amazing game designer I love. Premise rejection is like when the players do that, as in,
they rebel, right?
Yeah, as in, we're not going to go to that Lovecraftian town full of monsters. We're going to go stay in the pub and lock the doors and not go anywhere near your mystery. Yeah. Premise rejection. So like trying to actually turn that into not a bad thing in the story, but a good thing. Yeah. Because that's when the moment the story opens up, as in, no, wait, they're doing something else. This isn't about the fetch quest. Yeah. This is about everything else, which is so fun. That's something I tend to do in my comics is I set a new status quo every arc. So at the end of the arc is, here's a new status quo. So partially,
and we're in a drastically different place at the end of this one.
Exactly. And that's in Wictive it's the same. And then I think that's, especially in a serialized narrative, the gap between trades is hard. Give a decent, here's what's coming, a promise of what's happening. Oh, that'll be interesting. And that's enough to carry over the 6-month gap to the next trade, hopefully.
Now, that's my thing. Bring me up. So, when did issue 5 come out? June?
Yeah.
Or that's when the trade came out. So, issue 5 must have been May?
Yeah. Actually, it might be April, because I think we finished in April, gap month, trade, gap month, back is what we should be.
Gap months are for you to get ahead, for you to rest. What's happening?
Stephanie, anyone who flicks through Die, Stephanie is an insanely beautiful
amazing artist,
and it's painterly, and it's just not capable. It's not something you can do on a monthly, ongoing basis.
Gotcha.
So we have like planned breaks, to sort of like
allow your arc, break,
get ahead of deadlines, and then we get close to the deadline, then we have another break. And sort of carry on. That's kind of, we did it in Wictive, but with Wictive we put specials as well. Gotcha. So we had like guest artists. With Die, it's like, I don't think I want guest art. I think so much about it being Stephanie's hands world is important right now.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the thinking. I mean, it's like, obviously it's not ideal, because obviously you'd rather it come out more, but it does give you a chance to like, okay, the trades come out, and then people can jump on the trade and think, oh no, maybe I'll join the single issues now.
Yeah.
So I mean, our sales are up on issue 6 actually, which is rare. Like normally comics launch then kind of go like this, but we've kind of like.
You're getting on at the right time, and I think so many of my friends and colleagues and peers, whatever you want to say, in gaming want to read comics more. And I know, like, literally when I found out about Die and started tweeting about it, like, the next week, Jonathan Dornbush from IGN started tweeting about it as well, because him and his girlfriend were like, we're going to get into comics, and this has been recommended because on top of that, Critical Role is huge. And Critical Role, and Matt Mercer's, your backup book quote here. Like,
I mean, that is a bit like getting I don't know, if Phonogram, my music comic, had a quote from John Lennon on the back.
Yeah,
it's a bit like that,
Exactly,
that could not be any better. God bless them.
Yeah.
It's like kind of, hooray. It is weird, and that kind of, it wasn't as big in 2016. Like it was starting to come.
Yeah.
And it took us like 2 years to come out. And I was thinking, ooh, we look kind of bad, do we look bandwagon jumpy? And
exactly.
It's worryingly well timed. Like, it wasn't planned in that way. It was just kind of like, oh no, that moment, and it was suddenly intense. It's all part of the zeitgeist.
I totally think it's what we were talking about earlier. If you were telling just a D&D story, then you could see it being bandwagon. Again, the fact that yours is a horror comic, right? And it is these twists on everything you expect to happen, it's not going to happen that way.
It is too much. That's 100% what the book is, which is the appeal of it.
Yeah.
Actually, like, it is very zeitgeisty. I mean, that San Diego's 2016. Like, I think the core idea, which is, D&D, Stephen King's it. As in because the for people who haven't read the book is told in both timelines simultaneously. So it's about the adults and it's about the kids.
Yeah.
So you see the traumatized adults, and then but you don't know what's happening to the kids. So you sort of it's really interesting tension, and I always love that in it, in terms of like you see what this does, and that's really scary because normally the credits end and the heroes have defeated the baddies, but seeing them like 30 years later and that kind of the weight on them, that's amazing. Anyway, so I was like. Jerry Duggan, who's an amazing comic writer. I was having dinner with him on Monday night in LA, and I was like, "Oh, I'll tell you about. I've got a new idea for a book. I'm incredibly in love with it. It's going to be great." And he said, "Oh yeah, have you seen Okay, yeah. Oh, have you seen Stranger Things?" And I'm like, "No." And it's like, "What's it about?" "Oh, it's 1980s. It stops 1980s D&D game." I go, bollocks. And it's got a real Stephen King atmosphere. Fuck. So immediately, and of course we're completely, Stranger Things is a book about the kids. It's all about kids, and this is very much about 40-somethings, and we're miles apart in tone. But I was aware that if I just, if you give the pitch, it sounds a bit Stranger Things. Sure. So I tweaked my pitch so it sounds less like it.
Yeah.
But the other thing was really strange is I was originally planning to have the game be in 1983. Okay. Because as a kind of a nod to the D&D comic. The D&D cartoon, which was 1983 to 1985. So, like, the fact that Stranger Things was 1983 as the start was like, that was one thing I made it move. And to be honest, I think I would have moved it anyway. Yeah. I really like the sort of the 90s vibe. Like, they're going to die the month that Smells Like Teen Spirit was top 10 in the UK. Nice. So it's like 1991 is kind of the birth of the 90s.
Sure.
So and that's also in RPGs, like the Vampire the Masquerade debuted in it. So that kind of the birth of the kind of the gothy, like dark side of the 90s stuff. Yeah. And like Doom's just around like all this stuff is floating around, and that's kind of like setting in the 90s makes it a very different feel than an 80s set.
Sure, 80s, and I'm not saying 80s is played out, but it's happened so often.
Yeah, I stopped myself saying played out as well. Yeah. But that kind of like, it does feel like, the 90s thing gives it a very different kind of timbre. And
that's why I want to see you get back to it, and I really want to see what it's like of when they pop out 2 years later, right, and they're back, and what is that integration like? I'm telling you, here's a little list of things I want to see. I want to see that. I want to see them interact with their kids, their parents. I want to see them interact with cops, because cops, I don't understand, like, you know what I mean? Like, again, they put not a curse on themselves.
A gaius.
Thank you.
I think that's how you pronounce it. It's Gaelic, so like Gaelic is really hard. Or Gias, maybe? I don't know. Geas.
This is why you write the words.
Yes. Yeah. That's what I do. Yeah. I'm not even joking.
No, me too. No, trust me. It was way easier to write about video games than I try to talk about. I'm like, oh my God, I don't know how to pronounce
it. That's
funny. But the fact they come out and they can't talk about what they did and what it was, because of course there's a whole thing about, keeping people out of it. I can't wait to see those interactions and how that plays out.
That's fine. And there's one scene, like, I'll mention it, like, I really want to write. And it's like, after all that, it's the first night, because in Britain, actually, they'll be 18 by the time they come out. But in Britain, especially then, you probably started drinking earlier. You were probably 16 when you were drinking and trying to sneak into pubs.
Sure.
Because we're a weird country.
You're a great country of drinkers, and I love it.
Very thirsty people. But like the going to the pub on the Friday night in the kind of like and their friends. And like not being able to talk about it. And they kind of go out the back, because like that kind of place near the pub where they go after closing time. Yeah. That really weird, like, lived in, and that real moment. Not like a kind of like cliched idea of what teenagerdom is like. That kind of like, because a lot of my teenagerdom was hanging around because no one had a car.
Of course, yeah.
And that
you have no money, you have no car, you're underage. What are you gonna do?
Exactly. And so like they're sitting down by the river and kind of just shrugging, having had this incredible experience, and kind of like the glances between them, and just realizing, oh, we're gonna have to live with this. Yeah, that's the moment that and I think that's for me. That includes all the stuff you're talking about. Yeah, that all that nuance. I love that shit.
Sure, yeah, and the emotions inside of, like, first off, not being able to talk about it, but then also, like, I'm sure some of them missing aspects of it, right? Not all of it, obviously, because it's horrifying and they were taken there against their will. But for sure, like, that's it. I mean, for 5 different characters in this scenario, right? They're gonna have lots of mixed emotions about it.
I think stuff is complex. Yeah. I 100% agree. Things are just complex, and like that's what I want. As in, like, as I said earlier, all the cats have a very different response to being back in die. I mean, Chuck's clearly into it. Yeah,
it's
just fun. I can do pull-ups again.
Exactly. That was funny. That was a funny line. Right?
But all of them have different pushes and pulls, and like, and why they want to go home is also interrogated. What is the reason for them going home? Because that was the great joy of setting them at 40s. Like, you kind of get like Matt. Like, Matt's kids. He had kids young. His kids are now 18, 19. And versus someone, and that's me. Oh, my kids are going about to leave home. Versus someone like Ash, who never had kids, And then, of course, they're now at the age when they realize, I'll probably won't have kids. So, those two stories simultaneously, that's really grown-up shit.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that's kind of like the whole story about Matt talking about, like, trying to be brave for his daughter when the daughter was ill. That's like real grown-up stuff. Like,
and again, that pub scene's so brilliant. Because, again, like, you go into this, and I think you're thinking it's going to be a house of horrors the entire time. When in reality, you get this great scene of, like, cool, we're at the pub, and then, like, the dwarfs will come over and they want to drink with it. And I was like, what's about to happen? Oh, they're just gonna get drunk and tell stories and talk to each other as every fantasy dwarf did, right?
So my throwaway, like, this is one of the dumbest jokes in it, and that the dwarves are clearly also based off of Seven Dwarves. Like, it's Delighted and
Bashful.
I've just given them a name, like Delighted and what's the other one? Dour. They're the two dwarves. So Delighted is always upbeat, Dour is always down. And of course, that's also a Sandman joke because all beginning with D. But like, the idea you're writing these literal one-note characters, and they're bad, they're like not well-rounded NPCs, quote unquote.
I don't think it's this conversation, but one of the conversations somebody does call the other person on being a crappy NPC, right?
I think you're really badly written. And I think actually there's a bit about Dies, and like this is a sort of thing that grows in it, and some of the characters they meet are more quote unquote real than, and like that's one of those. So the question of reality isn't just a yes or no. They're kind of like graduations in there. It's really interesting. I hope it's really it's really interesting for me to write.
Sure. Well, again, at the end of the book for volume 1, like there's that conversation about it where when they said it early on of like we're gonna treat it like it is real. I was like, all right, whatever. It's a game. And then you get to the end and like to see them separated on this argument, these ideas. It's like, well, that's actually again really interesting. You're going, I'm not trying to pin you down. How long is this going to go? You do have an end in mind? Okay.
It's well, I think like you don't go straight off, like Wickdiv's like 5-year mission. It's going to be like about half the length of Wickdiv, I reckon.
Okay.
Like I'm going to say like 20 to 25 issues.
Yeah.
But like the thing we are doing, the issues are longer. Like most comic issues are like 20 pages, and we're doing 25-page issues. Like generally 24, 25-page issues. Which I'm not quite sure. I think I just wanted to have slightly more content in an issue, and it would make the trades thicker. As in, we would, instead of doing 6 issues and a trade, it would be 5 issues and a trade, but the same size.
Sure, and that was my thought too. When I got to the end of the digital books, and it was 5, and you talked in there about doing the trade, I was like, wait, what? There's a 6th?
But sometimes, I'm like, that sounds fun, and that's like makes it meatier, and it makes us get to the trade quicker. But of course, what that does mean that we actually earn less money. So it's like we're giving 5 issues in 6 issues worth of content in 5 issues.
Yeah,
like, I never said I was smart, but that's fun. Like so about half a length of Wickdiv, like about 20, 25 issues. So maybe that sort of length. But the thing about Die is, whilst I know the end, I know the structure. Like Wickdiv has an ending which you definitely can't continue past. Die is that kind of like the threat of Die continues to exist after the end of the novel.
Okay.
So in words, there's a sense I could come back to it.
Sure.
As in I'm already sort of chewing over, do I want to do a sequel?
Sure.
And if I did a sequel, what would it be? But that's way down the line.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a few pieces of cool meta nonsense I've got. I could do for the sequel.
Yeah,
but yeah.
And then of course you've put out the RPG itself.
Yeah,
it's the beta's up, but you can go get it. Right, die-comic.com.
I think it's diecomic.com.
Gotcha.
And like it's on the sidebar. Basically, it's a beta. I designed it myself. It's entirely free at the moment. We may do a...
Get there now, otherwise I'm going to start charging your ass.
I may change my mind. No, it's like, down the line, if people like it, and they seem to be actually liking it, which is nice, I may do like a fancy, proper edition.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is kind of a weird, like, thing I've really obviously cared about, because it's like 65,000 words. Like this is not a small side project.
Does anyone ever rein you in? Like write the comics, write the rest of the do this stuff. Write a game.
Scribblemania is very real with me, as in just words come out. Graphomania? That's Graphomania, isn't it?
I think
Scribblemania is what the Brontes called it. That's where that's a different story.
Exactly.
The Brontes are weird. Like the Brontes turn up in the second arc.
Okay.
Because they've got a weird link to D&D, which we'll go into.
Okay.
But the Brontes as kids were weird. They were proper weird.
Okay.
So I want, like, especially after the back of Wickdiv, it's kind of like one of the things I wanted to do was make my works more intensely me, and do stuff that I thought only I would do. And the RPG is a bit like that. As in, I know writers who've done RPG systems and stuff to tie into their books, but this is like big. The chunkiness and how much it's been done, it's a real thing. And it's written in my voice. I think the manual's funny. I think it's kind of like, there's at least two good jokes. But it is kind of like a really interesting complementary project. Because like, for example, in Wicked Divine, I have this playlist, like 500 songs. And I basically spent most of the last 5 years listening to that on shuffle.
Yeah.
And by playing those songs which are connected to the characters in different orders, I'm thinking about the story in different ways. So I'm like removing the pieces around and, okay, this character plus this character, what does that mean? And so I can very much tie some key inspirations I had in the comic to listening to that at random times. With Die, doing the RPG is a little bit like that, as in it makes me think about the world more from a slightly different angle.
Yeah.
And to begin with, probably for the first year, I was a bit worried whether what is the tail, what is the dog? As in, is it a comic with an RPG or an RPG with a comic?
Oh, yeah.
And I kept thinking, I've got to push it towards the comic because it's a comic. That's what makes money. That's why we're doing it.
Sure.
But at the same time, it reached a point where the thinking became so entwined. It's like the dog ate its own tail. I was an Ouroboros. You know what I mean? Like, that thing was like just out. And now, I cannot separate the RPG from the comic in my head.
Okay.
In the same way, I don't think Tolkien could separate his languages from his world. And the languages were actually why the worlds existed.
Because when you announce, well, I mean, you talk about in the first essay that you're working on the actual RPG game part of it. I assume, that is guiding in some respect what's happening in the comic because you have to have them all tied together of how they're playing out, right?
Yeah. It's a bit like, to begin with, a lot of the actual game was like me working, how can I mechanize the literary stuff I've put in the comic? So like, like the Neo needs Fair Gold. To power up their cybernetics. Okay, how do I make cybernetics work? How do I make Fair Gold work? So all the way through, what's a cool mechanic for making that work? And what's a good way of like showing it? That's all basically what we did. And also how to I'll give you an example. We have the Grief Knight in the comic, and the Grief Knight is somebody who uses their own sadness to power up their, the sadder they get, the stronger they get, in kind of like weird Hulk way.
Yeah. And it's Matt, and he hates it.
Matt hates it, and like, who wants to be depressed? But like, that's about him. That's a complicated, interesting thing. But like, we got the research. This rewind slightly. In my research, I was thinking about like paladins and like the D&D grids, lawful and chaotic bullshit. And I think that, okay, trying to unpack that, because I always thought old school paladins, which had to be lawful good, were a bit weird because it just seemed strange. And I found something like a different kind of metaphysical structure. And I found myself Robert Plutchik, who was like a professor, who basically had a theory that there were 8 primary emotions. And all emotions are based around mixing these emotions, so like joy, terror, fear. I don't remember them all, but
sure, yeah.
And they've all got intensity. So you got like, ecstasy is high level joy, and medium level joy is just joy, and so on like that. Yeah. And they've got this. Google it in Wikipedia. They've got this dial, and I looked at that and I thought, of course, D8 being a classic fighter's. It's the broadsword. It's the damage of a longsword, and it's such a classic fighter number. Like using that as the magic system or the underpinning metaphysics. So like there's joy knights, there's grief knights, there's fear knights, all the way around. And now, of course, what I've got to do in the game is make all those work as a mechanic. And this actually works. I mean, the way the Grief Knight works is the sadder I am, the more, the better attacks I fire off. And there's like mega attacks I can fire, which
powerful,
which burns it off in one go. So like, that kind of catharsis kind of moment. And there's one other thing they do as well, which is, hasn't turned up in the comic yet. The Grief Knight can draw emotions off people, or their own emotions. That's very, like, dictators can make people feel stuff. Knights can draw stuff off. So like, if you think that's true, like a Grief Knight is pretty weird because they've got to feel sad to make stuff. Their emotion must be high to do this. So you've got this, but they've also got a very cool thing is they can draw sadness off people. That makes them they're quite good people to be around. Yeah. Conversely, if you the same mechanism, think about Joy Knights. Joy is basically feeling happy about something. And okay, you're in combat. Who feels happy in combat? And that's like, oh no, these can just be. An ideal Joy Knight's a real sadist. Yeah. And so they're called a Joy Knight, but not all of them find different methods, but a Joy Knight
who enjoys fighting, enjoys killing.
Exactly. Yeah. And they're like, there's something really dark about that, especially when you got the emotion drawing, because like, oh, I'm going to make you not happy. Yeah. Especially because if you roll really badly and critically fail, they don't get that emotion back. So in other words, like, okay, I'm going to take, I'm going to find someone who's like, okay, oh, do you love your wife? Oh, of course I do. Then you draw the love off, God. And then use the love to kill the dragon. And then, sadly, you don't love your wife anymore. That's the Joy Knight, and that's bleak. Yeah. And then all the other ones, like there's that's one where, like, obviously not all Joy Knights are that bad, but that's like the villainous, utterly awful Joy Knight. And all those 8 emotions interact with those simple rules in a way which extrapolates. So in other words, there's only one of those knights in the game, sorry, in the comic. Yeah. But the rest, I had to work out the rest to create the underpinnings of it, which means the world is very rich. Like Joy Knights, I mentioned that because they're so obviously the most dark of them, but they turn up later. And a lot of it's like in games, like how does a Vigilance Knight work? Like, so it's like, okay, a Vigilance Knight is probably on alert most of the time. But like, or like a surprise night. Anytime something awesome happens, they'll probably get a peek, and like. But like, the longer a fight goes on, it's like, well, I know I'm in a fight. I know this, and they've got their emotions going to taper off. Whilst a fear night, it's like, how can a fear night? If you're afraid, why are you even in combat?
Yeah.
So they kind of be like, it's a fight or flight. You corner them, and they're trying to like, the fear night works very differently. So like, just by taking those kind of basic ideas and throwing it through the system, you get these 8 versions of one character class.
In this journey, at any point, working on Die the Comic, Die the Game, Die the Life. Do you sit there and go, man, like, was there? I got to turn around. This is too much. Like, I'm getting way into the weeds here.
Like, it's one like, I think I've written enough like overdeveloped worlds to know that I don't need to. You know what I mean? I'm not gonna put it in the comic. As in, I'm explicitly. I'm not thinking I've got to cram this in the comic. It's just stuff that's useful for me to know.
Okay.
And the longer I've gone into it, I've sort of thought, the Tolkien of it. Tolkien had to know much more about Middle Earth than he would ever put in the actual book.
Sure.
And it's a bit like that, and that gives the world a certain weight. So the idea that all my extra thought is hopefully giving Di clearly this is a big thing, and people kind of sense that, and it's not just like here's the fancy land with some elves, there's a weight to it, and that's kind of like, it's almost like I've gone all in, and you can sense the all in. And that definitely comes across. On the other hand, there was definitely times, this is a 65,000 word document, Chrissy, my editor, she's having to proof it in quite a tight deadline for release. And I'm like, why? This is a novel. This is a small novel, which I'm giving away for free on the internet as marketing, basically. That's how, why would anyone sensible do that?
Yeah.
And that's what I mean. That's the fun of it. That's kind of what I think people respond to the work as. It's not sensible.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, I think it's the fact that like, people who consume content, whether it be comics, movies, TV shows, right? They want to know the creator is as in as they are, right? There's nothing worse than when you see a clip of somebody going to a Comic-Con panel and being like, in episode 4, this happened. Why did that? And then being like, it's a show. It's like, well, then why? If it's that disposable to you, right? Like, you clearly care. Like, you clearly have poured this in there.
There's something you said earlier reminded me of something that Scott Snyder said, and he was talking about the difference between work for hire and creator owned.
Yeah.
And it said with work for hire, it's a question of like, you have something which everyone cares about intensely, and you have to find a way to make yourself care. And conversely, creator owned is you have something you care about intensely, and you have to work out a way to make anyone else care.
Interesting.
Which is like that feels very true, because I mean, I've done a lot of work for hire, and I will never do I've never done work for hire. I've got to think for a second without making myself self-care, as in like, people ask me to do a character I may not have heard of, I've got to research them and think about them, and why do I care about this random like C-list character?
Yeah.
And you've got to find a way, and if you don't, I can't write it. But the creator owned is interesting. How do you communicate caring about something? As you said, it's quite hard to describe Die in that, like, it's Goth Jumanji is really simple, but like, it's 2 words, and then of course there's 65,000 words in an RPG supplement. How do you bridge the gap between over here, that's something that's simple and pure, and something over here which is clearly scary? And you're back away from me if I was on a bus with you and started talking about it. Yeah,
the reason it's worked so far, and I think it's finding such an audience with video game and D&D people, right, is not even the source material, but it's easy to wrap your head around. Okay, they're in a game, I get that, and then it's seeing yourself in different characters in different times, right?
That's what I hope. Like, that thing is like, when I talk to people about Die, in meetings and stuff, it's very, you say getting lost in the weeds. If you get me talking about that stuff, it's very easy to get lost in the weeds, because there is so much weeds. But it's not about the weeds, it's about the 6 people who are going through the weeds. Yeah. And that's the thing, it's like, for me, it's like, it is just about like, not just, it's almost predominantly about the 6 people. I was actually working on a different comic before I did Die for Stephanie, because we were talking about it for a while, so I was building this world. I was really interested in the world building. It was me, I might even come back to it because there's some good stuff in there. But I couldn't, something was wrong with it. I couldn't work out. And then I was on a panel with Margaret Liu, who does the amazing comic Monstrous. Yeah. And she was talking about how hard Monstrous was for her. And she realised the problem was she didn't have a character to see it. She made all this world stuff, but she didn't have a character to see through it. She had Middle Earth. She didn't have a Frodo. Gotcha. And they're like, no, Frodo, Middle Earth without Frodo is utterly meaningless. Yeah. And that's the kind of like, that when she said that on the panel, I was like, oh right, that's exactly my problem. I've got like a really cool setting and like a good like entry point, but I don't know who's going to go for it. And Die was like, when I had the idea, instantly because have I lost myself in a fantasy world? That's Sol. That's the kid who got left behind, who's become emotionally completely lost in fantasy. And like, that's the worst possible portrait of myself. Okay, that's one. Immediately you have one character, a really strong antagonist, and then it's like, okay, who else? And that's kind of like, so with Die was immediately, before I had the world, I had the kind of like, I know the people, I'm going to drop them into this hell and see how they survive. You know, which is when immediately that's why I cried. I said, no, this is emotionally effective. And when writers say they cry, I'm always worried about how that sounds, but it's like, oh no, I found this emotionally effective. And like if I'm writing like a dramatic scene or a very, very powerful scene and I don't feel a bit choked up, something's gone wrong. Like I'm very much like heart on sleeve guy.
It's awesome, dude.
Thank you.
Of course, I have more for you. We have to talk about the end of Wicked and Divine, and we have to have you enter the friend zone, where Kind of Funny best friends have written in questions. But first, a word from our sponsor.
And you know what? Shout out to HelloFresh. With HelloFresh, America's #1 meal kit, you can get easy, seasonal recipes and pre-measured ingredients delivered right to your door. All you have to do is cook and enjoy. Or in my case, have Gia cook and enjoy. I really enjoy her cooking. HelloFresh makes cooking delicious meals at home a reality, regardless of your comfort in the kitchen. There has been times that I've had to help out, and it was very simple. You can say goodbye to endless grocery store trips and takeout food. HelloFresh has you covered. It's so simple. You just go, you choose your plan, they send you the box, boom. You open the box, there's these little packets. They're all pre-portioned. They could not make this simpler. You can break out of your dinner rut with 17 seasonal chef-curated recipes each week. Oh my God, Barrett. Yeah. We had this beef bulgogi bowl last week.
That sounds good.
Oh man, I'm getting a little hungry right now. You know what I mean? Yeah. You can add extra meals to your weekly order as well as yummy sides like garlic bread and cookie dough. Whoa! Easily change your delivery days, food preferences, and skip a week whenever you need to. They really do make this simple. There's something out there for everyone, from family recipes to calorie smart, vegetarian, and fun menu series like Hall of Fame and craft burgers. For $80 off your first month of HelloFresh, go to HelloFresh.com/morning80 and enter morning80. Again, for $80 off your first month of HelloFresh, go to HelloFresh.com/morning80.
The 80 stands for,
$80 off? $80 off. HelloFresh.
And we're back. Kieron.
Hello.
Hey, how are you?
I'm pretty good.
Thanks for spending so much time with us today. I know you, of course, you have a signing to do. You're out here from the UK. You fly out here. You go to Comic-Con. You do a bunch of meetings. You're up here in San Francisco. We're coasting off a comic experience. They're doing a signing with you. You give us time. Thank you for your time. I would be remiss if we didn't bring up the end of Wicked and the Divine. What is that like? How for people who don't know, what's the pitch on that book? How long have you been working on it?
Like every 90 years, 12 gods incarnate in the bodies of young people. They're loved, they're feared, they perform amazing, like, mind-warping concerts.
And I was going to say, it's something that's known to everybody. People know that these people are on Earth.
And then 2 years, they're all dead. And this happens every 90 years. I mean, it's kind of like, they know the story. Do they know it's real? Because the thing is, like, the last one was 1920s. And that's like, that's the first time they've had recordings of it, and the recordings don't show the god stuff. And, and the miracles are all secretive. So, like, people don't, are they gods? Is this weird cults? Like St. Vitus's dance and all this kind of like the dancing plague in Europe. Yeah. I think maybe it's just something weird. And this is like...
maybe it's just something weird.
Maybe it's like, it could be, like... anyway, but like, this is obviously, our story is about the 2014 recurrence, and where it kind of goes a bit wrong and everyone realizes, oh no, they really are like super powered like weirdos. And it's about basically art and death, because it's like kind of, this is the always the depressing story of Wick Div, is that it was my immediate idea for a story the week after I heard my dad was terminal cancer. So it was like my immediate response to grief. And it was that kind of, doesn't matter whether it's 2 years or 10 years or 70 years. Life is fundamentally very short. In which case, why be an artist? That's the thing. That's all these kind of like these incarnated gods are artists, and they're using their 2 years to try to reach people in different ways. And of course, they've got a cast of 12 major gods. They have different responses to death and art and what art is for. So the whole thing is kind of like a larger discussion of like, as I said, why be an artist anyway? Why am I spending my life doing this? Why am I spending my life doing anything? Yeah. So that's the kind of like the emotional nonsense beneath it. But in reality, it's this big kind of like, it's like behind the music set in Olympia, Olympus rather, and that kind of vibe. And it's ran for 45 issues plus 6 spin-offs, so 51 issues, 5 years of work, and it's this kind of me and Jamie McKelvey, who's like my long-term wife, as we put it. So we're like just this weird gang that we've been together since 2003. And this was our kind of like deliberate attempt to do our quote-unquote masterpiece. That kind of, this is our only chance to do a book this long. Yeah. So we had a big story we wanted to tell. And it's like, and it's also about stories and lies. So it's kind of like we knew the structure at the start. We knew each of these characters' arcs. We knew what they were about. There's a lot of stuff we didn't know, like in terms of execution, but like we knew how they died. We knew what I know what the last panel is.
Yeah.
So I knew what the last panel is when I started. So that's kind of like,
that's awesome.
This just feel like I've got close friends who really like Wick Div. So I feel like to some degree I've been lying to them for 5 years. Like especially issue 33 has a really big reveal, and like load of my friends like, how on earth could you keep that? Like, because I was just basically, and I was running on high anxiety because it's such a big twist. It's like I don't want anyone to guess it. So like I'm sort of please hold on.
Yeah.
And like that, and I don't recommend doing that to anyone because Wick Div is so structured and twisty that it was so much anxiety for doing it. Whilst it was a really effective thing and people love it. And it's that absolute when you could get over the peak of Wick Div, it's a roller coaster.
Yeah.
I don't think it was worth the emotional drain on me. I'm glad I did it once. I will never do it again.
Really?
And it's part of that goes into Die. As in Die is complicated, obviously, and wide. It's not that kind of big twist book, though. A lot of it's actually about the awful inevitability. You know, the kind of like if people see the twist coming, they're still satisfying.
Sure.
Which to us, that's always, any good twist is true anyway. But the kind of the card trick of Wick Div, I've dialed way back. Like this is much more about like the characters' emotions butting into each other and really coming out.
Gotcha.
So like but it's weird. I said it just finally feels like I'm sharing all the secrets, and we go from like something that people have been following on a month by month basis to something which is going to be complete.
Yeah.
So as people are able to see the whole thing of what we've done.
Yeah.
You know, the whole, like this is the whole journey. And now they can work out what's it meant what did it mean to you? Which is nice because it's like I want to sit back and go, tell me. Because it is about communication with people.
Yeah.
And it's about like why it's kind of like all the reasons why I became an artist, quote unquote, you know?
Yeah,
and
totally.
it was like me 38. It's kind of an early midlife crisis book. It's about saying goodbye to childhood. Or like all the things I've ever loved, I'm going to set on fire. And then come out the other end and see what I want to do. In which case it was Die. You know, Die is very much like explicitly a post-Wick Div work. It works in a very different way. I mean, it's still my themes, you know.
Sure, yeah.
I mean, Die is, Wick Div's about pop music, but if you actually go back, Wick Div's, the gods appear as different things depending which period they're in. So in 1830s, they were kind of romantic poets. 1920s, they're half film stars, half modernist poets. And that's like this 1923 issue, which is one of my favourite ones, which is basically, and then there were none by Agatha Christie, but with modernist poets. So like they're all these kind of like very serious people I'm riffing on, like T.S. Eliot and whatever, or Virginia Woolf, and they're trapped in a Agatha Christie murder mystery. So it's high art versus low art, and it's that kind of nonsense. So in the same way, Die's about art as well. Die's but the art in this question is games. So like my obsessions stay the same, but the execution and how I want to approach it are very different. So like it's fun.
So the question is, did you do it? You said you guys sat down with Wick Div and you were like, we want to make our masterpiece. Do you think you did it?
I'm about to send my newsletter out to when I get out, I'm gonna hit a coffee shop and write my newsletter, which I send out every week. I know there's a Belle and Sebastian song, If She Wants Me, which turned up on Random Shuffle, and one of the lyrics, if I could do one near perfect thing, I'll be happy. Yeah. Which was such a Wick Div, like the character's like, okay, I don't care if I'm going to die in 2 years, or some of them are anyway, as long as I make something that matters. And my kind of, if I can do one near perfect thing, I'll be happy. No, you won't be, but it's worth it. Yeah. Like it's a kind of like, I'm so glad I did Wick Div, and it's like it's got up and down. There's bits which would lose people entirely, and I certainly don't think it's perfect, but it's a big, huge burst. And of all the works I've done, like completed, it holds together best. And it's kind of like we got away with some nonsense. That was our thing. It's like, this is our big book. We can try stuff. There's issue. This is sort of nonsense we did. Like issue 23. There's an artist called Kevin Wadder who's amazing, but he doesn't do sequentials. He does these kind of like very like art photo shoot kind of style characters, really like hyper glam. Uh-huh. So okay, how can we do an issue based around Kevin Wadder? And I thought, we'll do a magazine issue. So like we'll do like a style interview magazine in the world. So I was like, I'll do fake interviews with the gods, and Kevin does some portraits, and it'll be fine. But then I thought, no, I know what I'll do. As in, like, I can talk, because I also know a lot of journalists. I'll talk to my journalist friends and say, okay, I'll get you on instant message, and I'll role play the gods, and you can pretend to be you interviewing me. and I'll be the god in question.
Yeah.
Except that I used to in the 90s play like text-based role-playing games online. So in other words, that's a completely different skill. So, and they wrote up the transcripts and these things into full-on interviews as if they were real.
Wow.
And we put this magazine together. And, I wrote an editor's letter. We did editorial cartoon for Joe. So it's real, like, this is a beautiful object. And who does that?
I was going to say, that shit doesn't happen.
Yeah, and Wicdiv did that repeatedly for not like that way, way specifically.
But that weird,
but
out of the
we'll go, we're going for it. We have complete control. We'll do something we think is really cool.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like the real joy of Wicdiv, as in like, Die is less formally experimental than Wicdiv.
Uh-huh.
And that's because I've done Wicdiv. I don't need to do it again.
Yeah.
And also, I think Die's experimentation gets pushed into the RPG.
Yeah.
That kind of where's the weirder experiment? Oh, it's the 65,000 words I've written hanging off this.
There's the experiment.
I put it over there.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was Wicdiv, and that kind of like, and the people who love it really love it, and that kind of like it's been
well,
especially like the
when did you know? When did you see that? Right? When did you realize you weren't tossing it out into a void or to a small audience? Like,
I mean, someone got a tattoo of a character before the first issue was out.
Really?
That's like, and okay, that's not advisable because Wicdiv characters are all messy, and they're often like messy to the point of like you maybe don't want that character on your body, as in you don't know what they've done.
Yeah.
So we always kind of warn people, oh, please wait a little. But early on, like immediately, there was so much cost. I mean, it's an indie book.
Yeah.
Like, it's not, you're never selling Marvel. It's not on TV or movie. But like, we had cosplay meetups with like 30 people at cons. And you got a lot of stuff, and like the intensity of fan base. So we all along, we got a lot. And then, especially near the end, there's some of the mature fan base stuff. Like they did an amazing thing called Iconic. Iconic was a zine. And what they did was, it's a zine of about 80 pages, I think, made out of in-universe articles written about the story, and it's arranged so it starts like before the story kicks off in 2013, and it goes through all the gods arriving on Earth, and they've got articles like some are obviously newspapers and some are like websites, but they've got stuff like there's a wonderful fake 4chan thread page, and then there's a character called Baphomet who has a lot of abs, and they're of course being very 4chan about him, and it's very and they've done all of this, so and they're pitch perfect. So in other words, it's a fan project written as if in universe of what the fans would be. So they pretended to be a fake fandom.
That's crazy.
And that's like, and it's a beautiful. I'm so proud of them. As in, I'm saying at their best. They give so much, and like, because I have to return to the thing I always say. It's a lot. It is a lot. I'm really like so proud of them, and that feels really paternalistic to say, but I'm very I feel very protective of them.
Sure.
Because it's like, it's not an easy book. It's a very it's a very queer book. It's a very diverse cast, but at the same time, it's like, these are about people are going to die, and that's one of the reasons. The first issue is like, every they'll be dead in 2 years. That kind of like we have a big warning sign, as in please back away. If this is not a story you want to go into, you should not be reading this book. Yeah. So the people who've like bought in to return to that RPG thing, they kind of were mostly with us. The people who stuck with us.
Sure.
So I'm really proud of it. And Jamie killed. Like, it's one thing. Jamie's growth as an artist across the series. He's always been good, but like he's doing stuff with the page which is astounding, and no matter what nonsense we did, here's an example of like us being like whatever. We obviously every 90 years there's one issue which half the issue is one scene that happens in every Pantheon. This one scene happens, and it is that scene every 90 years. So in other words, we had to research where in the world this Pantheon would be. Okay. Who were the god? So Jamie had to do like 126 character designs.
Jesus.
So we had to research each period, research settings, so like, and even for Matt, it's like Matt had to do a new color palette for every panel. Like most time, a color palette sticks for a scene. So that literally that amount of work was astounding.
Yeah.
And we did, and Jamie never told me to just no.
Fuck off is the response.
Yeah, exactly. If you said no, I tried to make it easy. I said we don't need to have backgrounds. It's still quite cool with just the figures.
Yeah.
No, he went for it, and it's like you see it. It's one of those things that some people it doesn't do anything for, but it's also not like anything I've ever seen in comics, which is of joy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like and it makes you kind of made me look at like human history in a completely different way. Like you sort of realize how important some regions of the world have been culturally, and and how short and how long. Because it's like since every 90 years, like the last page is basically everything we think of history. Like we think about stuff you think of history is on that last page, but also like. So it's how short it is, but at the same time, how many pages are about, how like for about 7 of those pages, Egypt is an important region.
Yeah.
Like Egypt comes back a lot, China obviously comes back a lot, but I really got to understand history in a kind of naturalistic internal. You know, you can talk. You know, stuff intellect. You know, the idea of like it's hard to imagine 80,000 people.
Yeah,
that's such a number. This issue kind of allowed me, and I think the readers who it works for, to sort of see history as a kind of thing. You know, and it becomes kind of real as in, that and that and that. As in, you know, my grandfather's, you know, the 90 years is a sacrum, is the phrase, which is kind of the idea of the max, like, I mean, the number the sacrum is, which is varies, but basically it's the idea that basically everyone will be dead. So in other words, all the people who are alive at the start of that period will be dead at the end of it. So it's literally a lifetime. And that's why I chose the 90 years. No, that's it. That's good.
Cool.
But so we did. So in other words, I'm really proud and also slightly ranty.
But so what is it like right now? Because like as we record this, you're at the finish line, right? The book's done. You've submitted scripts. It's been drawn. It's through the thing.
No, Jamie's like still on the. Okay, by the time this comes out, Jamie might be going to press. Like Jamie's still like he's about to finish the pencils. Okay. Like today, maybe today or tomorrow, and then he has to ink it. But you know, my script's done. And I wrote in one of my newsletters, I write about this, and yeah, I thought I'd kind of crept away because Jamie has some real, like, quite serious health issues, so he's the deadlines have slipped a lot.
Sure.
And it's kind of like it's got to be done when it's done.
Yeah.
So I thought I kind of slept at the back. I hadn't, I said goodbye in a very slow way. But when I actually sent that script over and sent it to Chrissy, who's both my wife and editor, and so someone else is reading this now, and like this, especially that last issue, that's been inside my head for so long.
Sure.
And it's been really lonely, and like. But also like how exposed I felt when I sent it off. So I went for a walk. I walked through a graveyard because I'm a total goth. Also, that's what I did in the first when I sent in the first issue. I went for the walk through this graveyard. So okay, let's go the same.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool.
Repeat and just have a little think. Yeah, it's like
Have you wrestled with it? Because I mean, like you're the guy who burst into tears thinking about creating Die. Like here you are done, and it's a book that's had such an impact.
I was like, I was on shuffle. This is funny. It's like I was listening to the new Taylor Swift single last night.
Hell yeah, you were. It's good, right?
It's good. It's good. And then it went on to Blank Space afterwards. Blank Space is on the Wickdiv playlist, and there's a line in that. You'll tell me when it's over if the high was worth the price.
Yeah.
And I found myself like listening to that on repeat because that's such a Wickdiv sentiment, and that kind of you got 2 years to live. Was the high worth the price?
Pain. It was a high worth the pain.
Sorry.
I don't mean to do this to you.
Yeah, you should.
Well, actually.
Yes, the pain is right. I'm actually mixing that up with the Florence and the Welsh. Florence Welsh Song on the Machine song. But yeah, that. And that's Wickdiv, as in was the high worth the pain for us? Yeah, I think it probably was.
Awesome.
And there was probably some times I thought it wasn't.
Yeah.
Because it's been really hard. And we'll never do anything like it again. And that's also
what was hard about it. Was it the deadlines? Was it the
physicality? And it's physicality and the fact the material it's based upon.
Okay.
If it's born from like my dad dying and like all the mess around there, that's I've got to keep on like churning that stuff over.
Yeah, you never get let that wound heal. I see.
I'm really in much a better place now. But there was definitely times I thought like Wickdiv was this torture machine.
Oh wow! Wow!
And 5 years is a long time. That's the other thing. It's like. I remember like around issue 26, I was like, I wish it was over. And that kind of, it's like running a marathon. I've never ran a marathon, but I understand you reach that point where you go, no.
Yeah.
We've got to do all this again. We're only halfway through. That. But it's done. And that's like, we did it. And like, it's so... This is all me and Jamie got into comics primarily, through the Vertigo books of the 90s. So those big runs. So like the idea of a set story, the middle, beginning and end, like 50 to 75 issues. And that's the kind of thing. Both of us wanted to do one of them, and we've done one, and that's rare. Like and a creator-owned book is, I think it is more emotional work than doing a work for hire book. Even though it can be the arguments you can do in a work for hire book are very intense, but the simple process of what you get to do, what you have to do, is hard. It's one of the things you sort of see people who do a big long run. No one goes straight from their magnum opus to another one. Like, Neil Gaiman left the industry after finishing Sandman. Yeah. Brian K. Vaughan, also left the industry and came back later. Warren Ellis after Transmet, he started doing 3-issue minis for like a couple of years. Yeah. Garth Ennis had quite a big break before The Boys, and so on and so on. After that, you just want to do something shorter. And for me, I'm like, I think one of my strengths as a writer is long form. Like, I work well if you give me like more issues. So I knew I didn't want to go completely short.
Just quiet, yeah.
But I didn't know that's why Die is about half the length of Wickdiv. And that kind of like, okay.
And you're like, this is short, this is normal.
Yeah, except
if I burned out around 24 of Wickdiv, I can
I can hold on. And also do you see like 2.5 years is a very different length of time to 5 years.
Yeah.
Like emotionally, it's like, if you go for a year, another year and it's over. If you go for a year, a 5-year project, it's like, I've got 20%. Why was I think this is a good idea? But like, yeah, that. I mean, also Jamie gets to now go and do his own thing, which is the exciting thing. And Jamie wants to do. I've been always saying Jamie should write as well. So Jamie, he's done like 4 issue mini, like a while back. In fact, Wicked was originally designed so he could only draw every second arc.
Yeah.
So like he'll do an arc, someone else will do the arc, so he could do something else. And then very rapidly, Jamie decided, no, I want to draw it all. Because I think, Jamie realised this is our big one. Like, he wanted to make it as perfect as he can, as much him as he can. But now he's finally free of me. And he's like... so I'm smiling. As in, like, he's been working on the background for a while, so he's building his own thing. Jamie is very fastidious. He takes things very seriously. So I really can't wait to read it. And that's probably best not to say anything more about it.
Yeah.
I was about to say, and it's going to be... No, I can't say that. I don't announce Jamie's book, he'll kill me.
Just casually drop it on We Have Cool Friends. Big deal. I want to bring one final question from me in before I get to the friend zone and bring in the Kind of Funny best friends to talk to you. It's something that, this is my own a blind spot, I guess, right? In Die, you talk about how for Angela's character being an amputee, you brought in a consultant to talk about that. For Wictive, you're talking about how it's a queer book. How do you bring in resources for that? Who are you talking to people about that? Obviously, it's worked because you found such an audience.
I mean, like, I'm not straight. Well, that's one. So there's a lot of I can write just because I'm, there's elements of the character. I'm just writing bits of me and pulling it apart and like doing that. What consultancy? We did have some specifically trans consultancy with Cassandra, because Cassandra being a trans woman, and certain issues about, especially the idea of like changing your name and the identity stuff was really loaded. So I wanted to like
get it, nail it.
And to be honest, our consultant was great. My essay is like the stuff which she picked up, especially early on, was stuff we thought, this is probably wrong, but I want to ask to make sure it's wrong. So like, and there were certain issues around. Sakmet, a black female character, and I especially wanted to talk to somebody about, okay, are we doing stuff okay? Is this too loaded? Or does this trigger? Is this a problem? So that's kind of with Wictive. It's kind of like we could like when we approach something problematic, we want to go and talk to people, and it does help. Having 2 women on the team also helps, as in editor and a editorial assistant to both women. So like. There's a plot involving pregnancy in there. There's a plot involving spousal abuse in there. So like those kind of things. And trust me, that was fucking nightmarish. That stuff is so loaded and so charged, and like you want to do it right. And it was always planned from the beginning. That's the problem with doing the big structural book. As in, once you've committed it, it's like the Titanic. We're sailing this way.
You're on the tracks, right?
And I'm like, I can't. I'm gonna have to write this and work out a way to like make it land and not be really offensive.
Yeah. So I gotta imagine that's such a gut check moment of like, you want to do this justice, you want to tell the story you want to tell, you want to reflect the themes, but obviously, how do you get in those shoes? It's
one of those like you just try to. I mean, a lot of it is just taking it seriously. I was chatting to some of it is of course the story you're telling. I mean, I'm explicitly a Wictive, is that I'm not telling. There's a lot of it's about the diversity of the cast. I'm not telling stories about their identity. Cassandra, it's not a story about her transitioning. But there's none of that. There's nothing about. It's not a trans story which I am telling. I'm putting a trans story into a trans character into this narrative. And whilst her transness is a filter which changes her experience, like it's kind of really key things like she carries on calling herself Cassandra because as a trans woman she's done a lot of work on her identity. And no, I'm Cassandra. I'm something else as well. But I'm like she holds on to that. That's one small example of how she starts processing reality.
Sure.
So that's a filter, but that's also not the story. And it would be a different thing if it was a story specifically about being trans. That's kind of like, and I forget who, it's Nessie Coates. It's like it's a rock and roll versus hip hop metaphor. Hip hop has to be authentic. That's so much the point of that is to be authentic. Whilst rock and roll, you can be a bit less so. And that's kind of like Wictive is a bit we try to we use the character's perspectives key, and occasionally we go deep into an area, in which case that's when we're careful. But we're really about the kind of like the genre of it. Yeah. But Die actually is a bit less. Die is a bit different.
Sure.
There's at least a reason why I said it in the UK than both of them. As in, like, I can write.
That, right?
At least, I can write certain things in the UK. I know it in a way which I don't know in the US. But there's certain other series I can very happily drop in the US because the more rock and roll it is, the easier I can do it in America.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does. No, 100%.
I mean, like, I always say it's to writers they're worried about like writing stuff. And one of the things is that if you're worried about it, that's a good sign. people who most mess up are the people who don't worry.
Don't give a shit.
They just go and write it and think they can. And if you're actually taking the time to look in stuff and discover and talk to people, that's a really good sign for you as a writer. As in you care about it, and me, all our teams care about this stuff intensely. It's like you want to do it right.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, now you're going into the friend zone.
Hey.
Kieron, this is where people, the Kind of Funny best friends, went to patreon.com/kindoffunny to be part of the show. Austin T writes in and says, Wicked and the Divine is definitively one of my favorite series of all time. One of the hundreds of things I adore about it is its near perfect incorporation of social themes, stigmas, sexuality, and personalities. How do you go about including all of these things in your work so well? Do you draw from personal experience and blend it into these characters, or draw from experience you've heard from others? Anyway, I love Wick Dev, Die, Peter Cannon, and you got a fan for life in me. Much love, Austin T.
Thank you very much, Austin. That's very sweet.
We talked about this just a second ago.
Like cut and paste, put answer in here. There's always a bit of autobiography for me. In terms of when you're taking characters, you're sort of taking bits, you're tweaking a lot, and you're imagining how it would change. I mean, there's an example I always talk about. Like I wrote a run in 4, and I took over a book 4 in a THOR. I can't say THs, and I took over the book. And it was like a really big name right before me, and I was basically doing a kind of fill-in run, which it was originally meant to be 5 issues and extended to 13, which is which is a good
classic here.
It's a good sign, but it was made it really
long form.
a really stressful time. That's true.
Yeah.
Got to get the long form.
Yeah.
But the two characters, there was Balder, who was currently the ruler of Asgard, and Doctor Doom. They were the two main characters, really. And with Balder, the bit of me I got was, okay, he's not ready to be king of Asgard. Yeah. And it's that kind of the part of me which is why am I writing 4? I shouldn't be writing 4. I'm an idiot. Yeah. And that insecurity I put into Balder, who is kind of obviously the hero, because he's worried, and he eventually overcomes it. And Doom, I wrote the other side, which is I'm the best. No, you're all about to get your asses kicked. You have no idea how good I am. Watch. Yeah. And that kind of the utter egomania occasionally inside a writer, I just threw into Doom. And those things are, both those things were true about me, but you take the parts out and separate them. And that for me as a writer, that's kind of, the way Wicked works, you've got these 12 characters and Laura. Laura's the lead. And all the other characters are kind of, to some degree, a little bit of Laura. As in, Laura kind of sees herself reflected in her friends and her lovers, and that comes back to her and allows her to understand herself better. And whilst obviously all the characters have their own story, it's all about that kind of that. That's, in many ways, Laura's kind of the writer of Wicked, as in Laura sees the parts around her and sees how it plays out. So that's a bit like what you do as a writer anyway. At least I do anyway.
In the vein of what you were talking about for taking on work for hire, other characters, Mitch Krassen writes in to patreon.com/kindoffunny and says, when you are pulled on for big name character runs in comics, Thor and Vader, what is your research process like to fully understand the character's history before writing? That's an interesting one, right? Because we're talking about what it's like to go into create our own book and create the backstory, the game for Die. What is it like when you're okay, you're going to do Vader, you're going to do Thor? Do you go back and try to read everything, the best of the best? You rewatch the movie for Vader?
Actually, with Vader, so much Star Wars, because the continuity was small, for me it became much more important to get it all. Yeah. I watched the movies repeatedly and I took notes. My notepads are full of minor details, what the hell was that about? And then that's interesting. And you just look at what's the subtext when Vader and Boba Fett talk? What's really going on here? Yeah. And for me, because Vader was basically almost like a historical novel, as in we know this period here, we know this period here. Yeah. What is the logical story between them, and let us extrapolate that. So that was really important, but it's interesting that's past. As in that's a continuity insert. So the Marvel universe is always going forward. And also the Marvel Universe is not a small continuity. The Marvel Universe is a rainforest. And it's a contradictory rainforest. It's really basic stuff. It's you've got to understand in the Marvel Universe, the Fantastic Four saw the moon landing. We've seen it on panel. They've seen the moon landing. At the same time, the Marvel Universe has only been in existence for 11 years. All the people in the Marvel Universe never saw 9/11, but there's been comics with them with 9/11. Yeah. You cannot take the continuity literally because, entirely literally. You've got to sort of squint and try to make sense of it. So you can't take that, naturalistic view. So what you do, depending on the project, is I think because the most important stuff is what is the character? Because when you're writing it, look at Batman. You can't. Okay, Grant tried, but Batman has changed in different ways. What is the idea of Batman is kind of malleable. Yeah. So it's one of the things. Okay, what's the character today? that what has the character recently been doing? That's the most important continuity for me. As in, like, okay, this is in continuity with what we've seen them doing in the last 5 years. As in, you know, like that's the stuff people have been reading the comic most recently know.
Yeah, of course.
And then the earlier stuff is the most big iconic moments. If it's a minor character, you can go and dig that out.
Yeah.
So it's like, you know, you need to understand what Wolverine is, not in a kind of like everything Wolverine has done way, but okay, who is Wolverine? How does he interact? Like, what do you want to do with him? Because that kind of stuff. Because a lot of it is in the Marvel Universe, you're not really paid to go and basically do the continuity insert. You're paid to find a new way for people to care about Wolverine in 2019.
Gotcha.
Like they don't want to have something, you know, as in the desire to actually just be a perfectly seamless insert into the timeline. A, creates really boring comics. B, is impossible.
Yeah.
As I've said earlier, it just doesn't work. So that's kind of that's what I weigh. There's some people who go further and say, no, you should always kind of start from scratch, as in, you know, fuck all continuity. I don't go that far. I'm like, I want it to feel like reward people to carry on reading.
Sure.
Build off what I've seen before, and then like you pick the key moments. I mean, this thing's, if you read a Wikipedia entry of a character, you get a very warped view of who they are because you get all these random adventures because they've all had so many random adventures. But like they're not the important stuff. you know, the really important stuff for the character, what defines them. You know, like Uncle Ben is
obviously,
like that's a really classic example. Uncle Ben is the thing you need to know about Spider-Man, and these are the really big, heavy emotional lodestones are the ones. I mean. And the other problem comes, like, say Emma Frost is an X-Men character I adore. She's like, is she like electrician? What's the word when you're an electrician scientist? There's a word for that. Literally, I'm very jet lagged with everyone.
Electrician scientist. Kevin, this sounds like something up your alley. Bioelectrical?
Like she's a scientist. She's made like fancy machines. You know, things. Everyone in the old school comics used to make fancy machines.
Yeah, of course.
Like that's just because, and that's nonsense. Like because like if I'm trying to write in a realistic way in the modern day, that just doesn't fly.
Yeah.
But also Emma has not used those powers for like 30 years. So in other words, if I was going to drop them in a comic, I couldn't just put them in a comic. I've got to reestablish her working in a lab and have lots of
Sure.
You know what I mean? That's the thing. It's like, so in other words, just because they've done something once, you've got to now actually wind it back in, which is why the stuff which has been most recent is stuff that most counts for me. And sometimes it's hard because it's like you have a take on a character. I mean, what can you do reasonably? And sometimes it's like, what do you see in a character? And for me with Vader, it was like, you know, in Empire, he was kicking everyone's ass. Like, End of New Hope, he was the sole survivor of the biggest military disaster of all time. Start of A New Hope, he is more powerful. Sorry, Start of Empire, he's more powerful than he has ever been. And he's killing people willy-nilly. But he never did that in the first movie. So, like, how did those two... So it's like he must have fell, and now he must rise.
Yeah.
You know, so that's an implied story arc. And in the same way as, like, if you're taking the last 5 years of the Marvel Universe, or where the character is, it's okay. How does that stuff make sense? Like, how do you, like... As a character like Marvel Boy, who I loved writing, but I had a kind of like, I found it quite, I was trying to square two ideas. I really liked the early Grant Morrison stuff, and you know, and I dug what Brian did.
Yeah.
But there's a real, it's like, originally he was this very anti-Earth thing, and then he became this kind of protector of Earth. And I was like, me trying to square those two things. And I came, okay, at one point he must have fell in love with Earth. You know, that was for me basically, and that allowed me, and that led me to this very pop cultural literate, like he's like it's sort of a weeby obsessive of Earth, you know, like in a very very enthusiastic and geeky way, but certainly nerdy. And that was me and with a lot of abs as well, though.
Of course.
So that was me kind of like
just like you.
That was me trying to. I wish, not like me. I wish. But I wanted to, you know, synthesize the stuff I'd seen before, and of course that's quite a radical take. That's an unusual idea. But in other words, a lot of people didn't see, you know, certain readers of the book didn't get or agree with me, which is fine as well. But I can show my working, and that's the thing is like, what you think is the character is different, you know, and you're actually paid to have a take. I guess
that's awesome.
That was a very long answer.
It's great. That's what people tuned in to see. Yeah. If they've come an hour and 43 minutes into the podcast, trust me, they want to hear you talk. You don't have to worry about it.
I'm trying to think there's anything like, there's no easy answer because you do. I always say like. You do enough. Actually, you do enough so you know to write the thing. Yeah. Like, you talk about getting lost in the weeds. Yeah. You know, reading every single, like, Iron Man story, for example, for me, would be getting lost in the weeds. But, like, reading the key important stuff. Sure. And, like, stuff which is relevant. Like, I always, like, if there's a minor villain that I look up, have these people ever met? That's the first thing. And if they've met, I'll read those stories. Yeah. Because my thing is also, if you have too much continuity, you lose people who've never read it. So a lot of the stuff is, like, trying to work out how to... give a nod to people who know the continuity without actually derailing the story. Sure. Like, and how can you paraphrase you know, because the stories are all lunacy. You can't just like drop a sentence in like, unless you do it as a joke, you can't drop in a paraphrase sentence. You've got to sort of allude to the story without taking him out of the present story, which is interesting. Like, I did this thing in Young Avengers, like Prodigy. I kind of did a beat with him, and there was like a whole kind of very complicated story about how he had his powers unlocked by the cuckoos, and I just said, okay, when my powers went crazy, which is like a paraphrase. My powers went weird one day, but of course, that's all I needed.
Yeah. You're awesome.
Thank you. You're very sweet.
This worked out very well. I'm glad you came through. I'm glad that you came out for Comic-Con. I know it was your first one of all time. You've never heard of San Diego Comic-Con.
I know. It's a mistake. It seemed very popular for this mysterious
I know, right? They were all there for you.
They
were all there for you.
It's like...
Kieron, thank you so much for coming through.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course, Die, Volume 1, out right now. Wicked and the Divine, finishing its run right now. Die back in August. The game's up on the website. I assume you're working on 15 TV shows. People are trying to make all comics or TV shows all the time now. All
manner of stuff. I've got another book coming out next month, actually.
Which one?
Once and Future, which is... It's just going to press at the moment.
Okay.
Once and Future is basically about a grandmother, a retired monster hunter grandmother, who drags her entirely unknowing son into the family business due to an Arthurian like threat coming back. So it's kind of like a bit like imagine the Mummy, but with Arthurian background.
Perfect.
So it's that kind of high adventure, but with this interesting like odd couple adventures. It's really like. If you read Dr. Aphra, which is what in my Star Wars stuff, it's very Dr. Aphra in terms of that kind of adventure-y and playful tone. Awesome. So that's a lot of fun. Dan Mora and Tamara Bonvillain on art, which is, I'm really pleased with it.
Okay. What else do people need to know?
That's about it, really.
Okay. Follow you on Twitter, I guess.
My name, Kieron Gillen. If you enter my name, I'm not on Instagram and Twitter, and a tiny letter I'm on. You can sign up on that. I'm easy to find, though.
All right.
Yeah,
well, thank you for coming in and making the time for us.
Thank you. It's been a delight.
It's been awesome. Ladies and gentlemen, remember this is We Have Cool Friends each and every Monday. YouTube.com/kindafunny. Roosterteeth.com. Podcast services around the globe. Knock on wood. It's on Spotify right now. If not, Tim is fired. Kevin, make a note to remind me to fire Tim in 2 weeks. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, it's been our pleasure to serve you. Dude, that was awesome.
That was a